Hello and welcome to a summary reading for the Crossbell and Erebonia arc of the Trails series. I'll be reading through all the summaries for previous games to cover the entire backstory before starting Trails into Reverie, which is a sort of finale or epilogue to the current arc available in the West. Whether you're just here to refresh your memory, or blind and plan to watch my upcoming Let's Play, welcome. Just so I don't throw new viewers off, I do play with a webcam, but I felt it was unnecessary for this summary reading video, so just so I don't throw you off. I'll be leaving chapter markers in the description for each particular section in case you're only interested in a particular part of the series. I hope you find this video helpful. Enjoy. Trails from Zero, Prologue. And Crossbell is a small state between Zemiria's two major powers, the Erebonian Empire and Calvard Republic. Behind the shining veneer of its rapidly developing economy, the state is rife with problems, including corruption and organized crime, garnering it the nickname the City of Sin. It's also home to Lloyd Bannings. Lloyd returned to Crossbell to train at a police academy, 3 years after his brother was killed in the line of duty. After graduating with high marks, he was ordered to join the newly established police division, the Special Support Section. The SSS's ostensible purpose was for the Crossbell Police Department to win back the citizens' trust that had been eroded due to corruption in its upper ranks and take back popularity to the Bracer Guild. Lost to the Bracer Guild. It was there that Lloyd met his colorful co-workers, Ellie McDowell, a reserved young woman with more to her than meets the eye, Tio Plato, the young technician sent by the Epstein Foundation, Randy Orlando, a womanizing former Crossbell Guardian Force member, and Sergei Liu, the division's chief, who preferred a hands-off approach. At first, Lloyd couldn't help but feel his new post would make it difficult to follow in his brother's footsteps as a detective. However, his eyes were opened to new possibilities, and the group soon solved an incident involving the Mafia interfering with two street gangs. Lloyd realized the SSS could shine new light on Crossbell's problems by taking a different approach, unique from the Bracer Guild and other police divisions. The SSS, sensing a role only they could fulfill to make Crossbell a better place, agreed to work together to accomplish that goal, no matter what barriers stood in their way. Chapter 1. The Bracer Guild's Crossbell branch was centered around A-rank bracer Arios McLean, otherwise known as the Divine Blade of Wind. The guild was already highly trusted in the region, far more so than the CPD, but its future was made even more promising by the arrival of two young bracers from abroad, Estelle and Joshua Bright. The two heroes hailed from the Liberal Kingdom and had led efforts to solve the Orbital shutdown phenomenon incident that occurred there just 1 year prior. Rumor had it that they had come to Crossbell in search of someone. Around that time, the SSS was investigating a case concerning monster attacks outside Crossbell City. The monsters resembled wolves, according to eyewitnesses, but the more the SSS uncovered, the less likely it seemed for ordinary wolves to be responsible. Eventually, the SSS discovered the attacks were perpetrated by the Ravachenko, Mafia's warhounds. Zeit, the leader of the wolves who stood accused of the attacks, arrived to help the SSS defeat the true criminals. Soon after, Zeit appeared at the SSS building, making himself at home and offering his aid to the still immature police squad. Chief Sergei had him officially registered as a police dog, making Zeit the newest member of the SSS. Chapter 2. The SSS was then contacted by Risha Mao, the co-star of Arc-en-Ciel's famous Ilya Platier. Risha said someone named Yin had sent a letter to the theater troupe, threatening to target Ilya if production of their newest show, Golden Sun, Silver Moon, wasn't ceased. Ravach once again was the first suspect, but new information caused the SSS to reconsider. They learned from neighborhood lawyer Ian Grimwood that Yin was the name of a legendary Shang Shou, an assassin, hailing from Calvard's eastern quarters. with likely ties to the famous Eastern syndicate Hayway. However, with no motive as to why a legendary assassin would want to interfere with the performance, the SSS's investigation seemed at an impasse. It was then that Mayor McDowell's secretary, Ernest Race, came to visit Ellie. He urged Ellie to quit the police and help her grandfather, the mayor, instead. I'm not sure if Race is actually the correct last name pronunciation, but I don't know it. Reese? Maybe Reese. Ellie revealed she joined the CPD to better understand her home, so that she, too, might one day run for office. With Lloyd's support, she cast her doubt aside and resolved to remain with the SSS and continue investigating the threat letter case. The SSS was finally able to locate Yin, with the help of the influential CEO of the International Bank of Crossbell, Dieter Croy, and the young runaway hacker, Yona Sacred. Much to their shock, however, Yin denied being the sender of the threat letter and instead made a request of their own to find the true culprit and apprehend them. The SSS chose to back up the CPD's 1st Division security efforts on the opening night of Arkansas's new show. There, they uncovered the true mastermind they were after, Ernest. He had sent the threat letter to create a diversion while plotting to assassinate the mayor. Fortunately, the SSS managed to stop Ernest before he finished the deed, but the case was left with many unsolved mysteries, such as why Ernest went to such lengths to kill Mayor McDowell and the origin of the superhuman strength he showed when resisting. Mayor McDowell urged Ellie to continue her police work and not worry over him, as he took time away from the office to recover. Meanwhile, Yin met with Hayway's Sao Lee to discuss the incident, but quickly excused themselves. Sao pondered what could be so urgent as Yin is seen running along rooftops toward the entertainment district. Chapter 3. The SSS was tasked with its busiest week yet, as Crossbell State celebrated the 70th anniversary of its founding with a 5-day festival. The second day had them searching for St. Ursula's Hospital's Dr. Joachim Gwenter, who wandered off to fish. Soon after, the SSS was summoned back to the city to settle a dispute between the local street gangs once more. Following an exciting afternoon, the SSS learned of an event called the Schwarz Auction from Estelle and Joshua. The name referred to a secret black market auction that was held each year during the anniversary festival, and it was said to be attended by Crossbell's highest-ranking politicians and elite. Naturally, that made interfering with the auction taboo among the police and Crossbellan underworld. Even Chief Sergei, who had never stopped the SSS from meddling with Ravach before, warned them to stay away from the auction, or else the division's days could be numbered. The SSS, frustrated by their chief's orders, continued to work through their support requests. On the festival's 4th day, they were tasked with searching for the missing son of Harold Hayworth, a local trader, which led them to working with an enigmatic girl named Ren. Ren was none other than the infamous hacker Kitty that had been plaguing the Orbital net of late, and using her skills, the SSS located and rescued Colin Hayworth. Lloyd soon realized the connection Ren shared with the Hayworths, and that she had come to Crossbell to observe the parents she loathed for abandoning her. However, as Ren hid in Lloyd's room and heard Harold tell the SSS the full story of how he and his wife lost their daughter, she realized they never abandoned her after all. Later that night, the SSS learned from Estelle and Joshua that Ren once belonged to the Society of Ouroboros. The Bracers explained they had come to Crossbell in search of Ren, hoping to welcome her into the family, and were disappointed to learn they had just missed her once again. Afterward, the two teams went out to dinner and bonded as the SSS was told the details of the previous year's Liberal incident. The following morning, the SSS received a letter from Ren, and with it, a token of her appreciation, an authentic invitation to the Schwarz auction, taking place on the last night of the festival. The opportunity was too good to pass up. The team resolved to attend the auction, which was being held at the manor of Speaker Hartman, the head of the Crossbell Diet and only politician in the state as powerful as Mayor McDowell. Lloyd attended the auction equipped with a disguise and alias thanks to help from Wazi Hemisphere, the leader of the Testament Street gang the SSS was well acquainted with. Once inside, he ran into Maribel Croy, daughter of Dieter and best friend to Ellie. She was there to bid on a doll from Rosenberg Studio, a local maker of highly sought-after antique dolls. Yin, who had also come to investigate the auction, warned there would be an explosive surprise among the auction stock. In the back room, Lloyd found something else contained inside the Rosenberg doll's trunk. A living, breathing little girl who could only remember her name, Kia. Lloyd acted fast, believing Kia to be the victim of human trafficking. However, Ravach didn't make escaping easy, as the threat Hayway posed had led to the auction being heavily guarded. Nearly home free, the SSS was cornered by the Mafia's commander and former Jaeger, Garcia Rossi. Rossi discerned Randy was actually the son of the War God, the heir to the Red Constellation Jaeger Corps. Just as Randy was ready to use the ruthless strength he'd been hiding, Chief Sergei arrived in the nick of time to help the SSS and Kia make their escape. Intermission. The SSS suspended operations in the week that followed as the mess of the auction was sorted out behind closed doors. Ravach claimed to have no knowledge that a human was among the auction stock and cut a deal with the police's brass to overlook the SSS's interference with the auction to avoid human trafficking charges and possible intervention from the Bracer Guild. Meanwhile, the SSS spent their week off growing close to Kia, becoming like one big happy family almost instantly. However, Kia's continued amnesia made it difficult to ascertain where she came from and whether she had a home to return to. The SSS knew they couldn't realistically look after a child of unknown origins forever, but no amount of police or guild investigation had produced any leads. Estelle and Joshua proposed the SSS try consulting the Septian Church, theorizing that they might be able to help if the cause of Kia's amnesia were psychological. Crossbell Cathedral's Sister Marble used thaumaturgy to help Kia recover some abstract memories of her past, but no more. She suggested the problem may lie in Kia's nervous system, which led the SSS to turning to Dr. Gwenter, a specialist in neurology. However, he told them Kia would need to be admitted to the hospital for an extended period of time, something Kia staunchly refused. Behind the scenes, Ravach licked its wounds from the shame brought on by the Schwarz auction's failure and feared further advancement by Hayway. The company's president and Don to the Mafia, Marconi, decided it was time to rely on a dangerous ally to turn the organization's fortunes around, despite Garcia's protests. Chapter 4. A month passed since Kia went to live with the SSS. One day, they received a visit from the Crossbell Guardian Force's Noel Seeker, who turned to them for help with an investigation into the Moon Temple ruins, situated in the Mines Mountains. Afterward, they learned that one of the mine's miners, Gantz, left to gamble in Crossbell City weeks ago, but never returned. Parting ways with Noel, the SSS found Gantz at one of the Entertainment District hotels. He'd been on an uncharacteristic lucky streak and belligerently refused to return to the village. In the days that followed, the SSS heard reports of people gone missing throughout the city and of unnaturally strong Ravach members attacking Hayway's office. Gantz had finally met his match in the form of Lecter Arundel, a quirky Erebonian in Crossbell on vacation. After Gantz had a mental breakdown, the SSS found mysterious blue pills in his possession. Between Gantz's uncanny gambling luck and the superhuman strength allegedly displayed by the Mafia, They began making connections between the mysterious drug and the strange incidents occurring. The first division was under pressure from the top brass to not investigate the incidents, so its ace detective, Alex Dudley, instead entrusted the SSS to follow up on the pills. They did so by handing them over to Dr. Gwenter for analysis, but not before hearing an unsettling story. The effects were allegedly similar to a drug known as Gnosis, produced years ago by a cult named DG. A story which seemed to turn Tio pale. That night, Tio explained her traumatic past, how she was forced into the cult's inhumane experiments before being rescued by Lloyd's brother, and that as a result, she gained unnaturally sharp senses. The SSS received word that all of Rabachu's members had disappeared as they waited for the results of the drug's analysis. Alongside Dudley, they took this opportunity to infiltrate the Mafia's base and investigate. Once in the Don's office, the SSS and Dudley found a shipping list for Gnosis, confirming that Ravach played a part in its latest distribution. Also hidden in a chest, in the back, was a stunning surprise: Guy Banning's CPD badge that had been missing since the time of his still unsolved murder. Finale. Later that same day, the SSS was left in suspense as they had still yet to hear back on the analysis of the blue pills. Worse yet, they were unable to contact Dr. Gwenter or anyone else at the hospital. Fearing the worst, the SSS left for St. Ursula as the sun was setting. Hearing along the way that Gwenter had also been Ernest Reese's physician before his sudden mental breakdown months prior. When they arrived at the hospital, they found Ravach's henchmen acting as though they were otherworldly fiends. After defeating the one standing guard, Yind arrived, willing to aid the SSS on their mission. Once in Gwenter's office, they were attacked by Ernest, clearly under Gnosis's influence. After he was defeated, they began going through the documents Gwenter left behind, finding evidence of DG's human experiments, including on Ren and Tio. Also among the files was a photo of Kia, slumbering inside a mysterious cradle-like sphere. Suddenly, Ren appeared and told them Kia was the key to everything happening. After returning to the city, the SSS was attacked by the CGF, who were being controlled just like the Mafia. With the help of Dieter and Mariabel, the SSS and Kia took refuge in the IBC building. However, Gwenter, through one of his puppets, urged them to hand over Kia. The SSS resolved to take the fight to Gwenter directly, left for his newly discovered hiding place, the Sun Fort Ruins. There, they met up with Estelle and Joshua and charged their way inside. In the fort's further steps, they found Gwenter and the altar shown in the photo of Kia. Gwenter further denounced the existence of Adios and explained that DG worshipped Kia, calling her the Divine Child. Gwenter further explained that Gnosis was a means by which to achieve true wisdom, and that Kia had been slumbering for 500 years. Gwenter, stopping at nothing to live out his delusions, turned himself into a demon by consuming the highly potent red Gnosis. The heroes fought back, but they were unable to overcome the strength Gwenter's demonized form afforded him. Thanks to being rescued by Ren, the heroes found an opening they needed. Gwenter was defeated, but his power was too much for even him to handle, causing him to disintegrate after the battle. Gwenter, in his dying words, claimed that Gnosis allowed him to see the truth of the world, and the inevitable fate coming for Crossbell. Okay, Trails to Azure. Prologue. The SSS went on hiatus in the months following the cult incident caused by former DG cult high priest, Joachim Gwenter. Ellie was traveling abroad with her grandfather, the Crossbell Diet's new speaker. Tio briefly returned to Le Mans for foundation work, and Randy was helping the CGF unit, once controlled by Gnosis, with its rehabilitation training. Lloyd took the opportunity to train with the 1st Division, and at the end of his training, a joint operation was put together between the SSS, 1st Division, CGF, and Bracer Guild. Its mission: find and capture cult zealot Ernest Reese and his hostage Hartman, the disgraced former speaker, who left office after his connection to the cult was discovered. Lloyd, along with Noel, Arios, and Dudley, managed to corner Ernest in the cult's former lodge on the outskirts of Altair Calvard, just across the border with Crossbow. Ernest explained he fled to the lodge to make use of the spirit veins that ran below it and achieve wisdom that eluded even Gwenter. After demonizing just as Gwenter did, Ernest began showing similar signs of self-destruction, leading Lloyd to evoke Ellie and Speaker McDowell's names in the hope of bringing him back from the brink. Ernest managed to return to normal and fall unconscious after the sudden appearance by the Grulsritter's Kevin Graham. Lloyd and company thanked Kevin for his assistance and parted ways in Altair. As Noel and Lloyd rode the train back home, they discussed the changes Crossbell had gone through under the surface since the cult incident a few months prior. With Ravach gone, control of the criminal underworld was up for grabs, and Hayway was poised to become stronger than ever. The new mayor of Crossbell, Dieter Croy, seemed to have high expectations of the SSS in tackling the challenges to come. Chapter 1. The following day, the SSS officially resumed activities with Lloyd Ellie, who had just returned, and its 2 newest members, Noel and Wazi. Better yet, the SSS now had an orbital car to make use of thanks to Mayor Croy, which they tested out by picking Kia up from Sunday school class. The new car, Model XD78, manufactured by Zeiss Central Factory, would allow the SSS to respond to requests on the state's outskirts much more easily. But before handling one such request, Wazi was challenged to a duel by his old rival, Wald Wallace, or Vald. I actually don't know if it's a V or a W, who was discontent with Wazi's decision to join the police and leave the downtown district. After Wazi dispatched Vald, I'm going to call him that, the 4 arrived in mines to investigate a strange phenomenon occurring in the abandoned mine. As they began to investigate, a sudden blast trapped the SSS inside, leaving them no choice but to press further inside to look for a way out. Randy returned to save the team from a strange monster in the mine's depths. As the SSS drove home, a call from Dudley clarified what happened. The ones behind the attack were the Red Constellation, Randy's former corps. They'd come to Crossbell on business and told Randy that his father was killed in battle. What's more, he was expected to take his father's place and become the new war god. Randy was shaken up that his past had finally caught up to him, but the SSS did their best to look into the Red Constellation's movements. Looming over Crossbell was the West Zemirian Trade Conference, a historic gathering of continental leaders organized by Mayor Croy. It marked a potential turning point in Crossbell's history regarding its relationship with Erebonia and Calvard. Chapter 2. However, in the shadows, another group was stirring with plans of its own. Ouroboros had arrived in Crossbell and was plotting its next move. The trade conference and unveiling of the newly completed Orcus Tower was fast approaching. The police knew they could take no chances, and the SSS would be required to support the 1st Division where necessary. Problems continued to mount as the conference drew closer. The SSS learned Hayway had signed a contract with the Calvardian government, and Randy was summoned to the New Blanc nightclub to meet with his cousin Shirley and Uncle Sigmund about returning to the Corps. Ouroboros also began causing trouble on the Orbital network. Meanwhile, a new analysis into Gnosis was completed by St. Ursula's Dr. Sayland, but everything beyond its ability to release the brain's limiters, couldn't be explained by biochemistry. Gnosis remained a mystery, especially its red variant's demonization ability. The evening before the conference, the SSS was summoned to Crossbell Airport and invited aboard Liberal's high-speed cruiser, the Arce, to meet Crown Prince Claudia and Erebonian's Prince Olivert. Having heard of the SSS through their good friends Estelle and Joshua, the prince and princess asked for a meeting to give them crucial information. The SSS was told of the problems that were plaguing Erebonia and Calvard at the time. Namely, each country was dealing with terrorist threats targeting its two heads of state, the Empire's Chancellor Osborne and the Republic's President Rocksmith. Later that night, the team was contacted by Yona, who told them a hacker had been running amok on the network and was using his old terminal in the Geofront. Dudley, having overheard the situation, insisted on tagging along to cover all bases before the conference. The team investigated the Geofront B sector, but played right into the hacker's trap and were locked in a fiery room set to explode. Just then, Tio appeared, having just returned from Le Mans, and freed them. With her arrival, the SSS, both old and new, was finally fully assembled. The West Cimmeria Trade Conference finally came, and Dudley agreed to add the SSS to the tower's security detail. Tensions were high, and everyone was praying the day would end without incident. But it was only a matter of time before those prayers fell on deaf ears. Anti-air defenses at the borders were sabotaged, and the tower soon was under fire from terrorist gunships. Security thwarted the attack, but the terrorists escaped before being caught by Erebonia and Calvard's hired muscle. The Red Constellation killed the Erebonian terrorists on site, per Osborne's orders. Osborne and Rocksmith had anticipated the attack and used it to further criticize Crossbell's security failings. They proposed that the Imperial and Republican armies be stationed at Crossbell's borders and the CGF be heavily scaled back. Mayor Croy had a shocking proposal of his own, however. He pleaded with everyone attending the conference that it was high time that Crossbell became an independent state. Intermission. Support for Crossbell becoming independent began swelling among the public in the few weeks following the trade conference's stunning conclusion. Meanwhile, the SSS took a couple of days off, still recovering from shocking events surrounding the Red Constellation and Erebonia's terrorists they witnessed. Mariabelle invited them to Michelin, where they could enjoy a brief respite at the newly opened Lakeside Beach and at Michelin Wonderland. To their surprise, however, Mariabelle also took the liberty to invite some of SSS's closest friends, Noelle's sister Fran, Lloyd's stand-in sister, Cecile, Ilya, Risha, and Arkanciel's newest member, Sully. Everyone washed away their woes at the beach and theme park before attending a dinner party hosted by Mayor Croy. There, Dieter shared his views on justice and Crossbell's independence with the attendees, and stressed how important they each were to Crossbell's future. Back at the hotel, Lloyd had a moonlit talk with Risha about her struggles, and she opened up about the burden of accepting her family's legacy versus remaining with Arkanciel. Kia went missing later that night, leading the SSS to investigate the park and clash with the Society's Enforcer Number 0, Campanella the Fool. After a brief dust-up, the SSS found Kia staring blankly at the park's Castle of Mirrors, unable to recall when or why she had left Lloyd's bed. As they sailed back home, everyone's minds weighed heavy with the reminder of the evil that was still lurking in the shadows. Meanwhile, having finally spotted a chance to speak with Kia alone, Mariabelle pounced on the opportunity to tell her that she knew of a solution to Kia's problems. Chapter 3. A public referendum on state independence was drawing near, as was the debut of Arkanciel's Golden Sun Silver Moon Encore. The SSS was back to work and had its hands full with following up on reports of mysterious monsters known as cryptids, the same kind of creature they encountered in the abandoned mine months prior. In doing so, they discovered a mysterious blue flower and connected it to the cryptids appearing. After consulting Reese Argent, a Gralsritter member on an undercover mission, they identified it as pleroma grass, a flower from the church's Apocrypha and the key ingredient to Gnosis. The SSS then paid Rosenberg's studio a visit, home to Meister Jorg Rosenberg. I'm sure it's a soft J, a member of Ouroboros and leader of one of its 13 factories. Jorg denied any connection between the society and DG cult, but confirmed the name attached to Ouroboros' current plan, the Phantasmal Blaze plan. Shortly after, a train derailment incident caused the team to track down a large monster into the Nox forest. However, the cult behind the derailment was no ordinary monster. It was Vald, who had taken Gnosis to demonize and gain what he believed to be true power. Vald disappeared into the forest after a battle, causing the SSS to return to the city and fruitlessly ask around his old hangouts for news about his potential whereabouts. Later, their efforts to locate two missing bracers led them to the Lake Elm wetlands, where they found abundantly blooming pleroma grass and Yin, who had come to investigate as well. In the wetlands depths, they encountered Campanella again, this time accompanied by Ouroboros' 6th Anguis, Professor F. Novartis, and 7th Anguis, Aryan Road, the Steel Maiden. The SSS was powerless in the face of Aryan Road's inhuman strength, and Yin's mask was destroyed, revealing the face of none other than Risha Mao. Ouroboros escaped, and Risha excused herself. Without a moment's rest, the SSS was contacted by Dudley, who said the Red Constellation had vanished from the Crossbell City completely. However, it wasn't long before the Jaegers re-emerged, occupying Mine's mining village and attacking the CGF on the mountain path. Randy retrieved his old Jaeger weapon, Berserker, and left for the mountain path, deciding to take matters into his own hands. The SSS left to find Randy once they discovered he went missing. After a clash with Shirley, Lloyd confronted Randy and scolded him for acting so recklessly, saying his teammates will never forgive him, even if he can't forgive himself. His teammates will forgive him, even if he can't forgive himself for what he did as a Jaeger. But no sooner had they liberated Mines, they were greeted by the sight of Crossbell City, aflame in the distance. Chapter 4. Mines was a diversion, and the Red Constellation's true target was the city. They set it on fire, gravely wounding Ilya Platier, and bombed key facilities one after another, including the police station and Hayway's office. Sal wondered just who they were working for this time. The SSS did their best to stop Sigmund, but the IBC building was destroyed, and the perpetrators escaped. In the aftermath, Crossbell suspected Erebonia was behind the attack. The SSS did everything they could to return normalcy to the city, but it wasn't long before Noel decided to return to the CGF to help their depleted numbers. The referendum was held, and the public voted overwhelmingly in favor of independence. The following week, the IBC froze Imperial and Republican assets, and Dieter declared the establishment of the independent state of Crossbell, naming himself as its first president. The CGF was reorganized into the Crossbell Defense Force, with Arios named as the Secretary of Defense following his sudden resignation from the guild. The SSS minus Wazi, who was mysteriously missing, then met with Kilika Roran and Lecter, each representing the major powers' intelligence agencies. Lloyd began to suspect that Dieter had orchestrated the raid all along. Just then, a frantic Cecile called Lloyd, saying that Arios had come to the SSS building and taken Kia to Michelin. The SSS quickly pursued, only to find the theme park abandoned and the Castle of Mirrors surrounded by an eerie light, as the bell atop told. The higher elements were active within the castle, and deep inside, Arios had taken Kia to a secret space behind the mirror on the top floor. The SSS stepped through the mirror and were greeted by Arios, Mariabel, and Kia, who was straddled into a strange device. Mariabel revealed the Croy family originally inherited the Septarian of Mirage from Adios, but lost it over 1,200 years ago. They had plotted for centuries to recreate the Septarian, incorporating magical science into the very foundation of Crossbell City. Kia's purpose was to be the vessel for the reborn Septarian, and the Croy family had manipulated the cult into looking after her over 500 years ago. The SSS was determined to take Kia back by force, but their efforts proved fruitless, as they were powerless in the face of the divine Blade of Wind's peerless techniques. A ceremony went on as Mariabel planned, and Kia was reborn into a Septarian, governing not only Mirage, but time and space as well, the Septarian of Zero. Kia then used her new powers to bless the society's ion archaisms. The Ions defeated the invading Imperial and Republican armies and stopped an attack from Erebonia's railway guns. Dieter Croy stood atop Orcus Tower, laughing as a barrier was erected around the city. Meanwhile, the SSS was arrested by Noel and the CDF on Arios' orders, but not before Arios confessed to being Guy Banning's murderer. Fragments. Now, ruler of the most powerful nation on the continent, Dieter coerced all other countries to join a United Nations, seeking to establish a new world order. The events in Crossbell had repercussions elsewhere as well, with Chancellor Osborne being shot and a civil war starting in Erebonia. Calvard, meanwhile, was suffering from an economic crisis and a sudden rise in terrorism. Ouroboros intended to depart the region once the Septarian awoke, but decided to remain and see how events played out. Meanwhile, Lloyd was completely isolated from his friends and imprisoned with a peculiar cellmate, Garcia Rossi. Just as Lloyd felt hope slipping away, Garcia told him that Guy wouldn't give up so easily. Lloyd resolved to fight until the end, and the two of them hatched a scheme to break out of prison together. Once outside, Garcia stayed behind so Lloyd could make his getaway. Lloyd escaped through the forest, but was eventually cornered by the CDF. Suddenly, a Zeit appeared, having returned to his original form as a holy beast. He then took Lloyd to Tangrim Hill to reunite with Wazi, who revealed himself as the Gralsritter's 9th Dominion. Zeit told Lloyd everything he knew. Centuries ago, the Septarian of Mirage, Demi-Orgos, looked over the people in the land, now known as Crossbell, governing them with some empathy. However, it became too much for Demi-Orgos to bear, and eventually the Septarian dissolved its own causality, disappearing from the world. Lloyd's feelings toward Kia hadn't changed, even knowing she was a homunculus created by the Croy family. He realized the same fate that befell Demi-Orgos could happen to Kia, so he agreed to work with Wazi in the church. They boarded Wazi's ship, the Merkaba, and planned to reunite with others and infiltrate the city. Finale. One by one, Lloyd reunited with his friends. Tio, who had been isolated at St. Ursula Hospital, Risha, who had joined forces with Hayway to fight the Red Constellation, Randy, who was working with the CGF resistance members in the mines area, even Noelle, who was still torn between her sense of justice and duty as a soldier, rejoined the SSS after a duel with Lloyd. The SSS was officially reunited once more, following the team's mission to storm Michelin, to free Speaker McDowell and Ellie. Soon after, Jorg contacted the SSS and confirmed the only way to trap the barrier surrounding the city was to stop the resonance of the bells at the Moon Temple and Stargazer's Tower. However, standing in their way were Campanella and Aryan Road. It proved difficult, especially challenging the Steel Maiden, but the SSS eventually was able to stop the two bells and drop the barrier. The path to taking back Kia was finally open. With the barrier down, the SSS devised a plan to infiltrate the city with the Grelsritter, Hayway, CGF, and Zeit's wolves. Once inside, they reunited with the police members who were staging a resistance of their own. Dudley agreed to the SSS being the infiltration team to storm Orcus Tower and arrest Dieter, so long as he got to come with. But first, the team was beckoned to Crossbell Station by Killica and Lecter. They theorized that there had to be a puppet master behind Crossbell's independence, and it was all too much for Dieter to pull off with only his skills. Once inside Orcus Tower, the SSS saw its inner workings and how the Croy family incorporated magical science into its design. Eventually, they made it to the rooftop and confronted Dieter, who had one of the ions by his side. He told them everything he'd done was in the name of his sense of justice, and after gathering mana and infusing with the ion itself, challenged the SSS to a battle to decide whose sense of justice was correct. Their battle met with a surprising conclusion as the ion Dieter was piloting abruptly ran out of power, much to its dismay. Novartis then appeared to collect the ion, saying the terms of their deal had changed, as agreed to by Mariabel. Dieter was furious to learn his daughter's betrayal when suddenly projections of his once allies appeared, along with the true mastermind, Ian Grimwood. Ian was the puppet master behind what they called the Azure Zero project, and had been manipulating Dieter without him realizing it. A great tree then appeared in the Pleroma-abundant wetlands, the Azure Tree. According to Ian and Mariabel, Kia was its core, and it was the final form of the Septarian of Zero. The SSS knew they would have to make their way to the tree, and their greatest rivals and challengers would also be waiting for them: Vald, the Red Constellation, and Arios. Resolved, the SSS set off, determined to put things to rest once and for all, and most importantly, bring Kia back from the brinks of despair, and then put a smile back on her face. As they climbed the Azure Tree, Wazi finally settled a score with Vald. Risha, strengthened by the bond she made in Crossbell, overcame Shirley and did so without exacting revenge. And Randy finally put the past to rest and moved on from the Red Constellation by defeating Sigmund. The SSS even overcame their greatest rival in Arios and forced the truth out of him. Arios confirmed he and Mariabel were the ones responsible for Kia being at the Schwarz auction. More importantly, he blamed himself for Guy's death, but it was Ian who pulled the trigger. All that remained was to stop Ian and Mariabel, and then take Kia back. Ian elucidated the Azure Zero's project's goal was to create a paradise without conflict by making the Septarian the arbiter of all of space and time. It could alter the past and spare those who were killed, such as Ian and Arios' family. It could even create a world where Erebonia and Calvard are subservient to Crossbell. Mariabel explained Kia cooperated of her own will, and causality had been rewritten once before. Kia changed the cult incidents events by bringing the SSS closer to Estelle and Joshua, leading to their teaming that night. In turn, Ren came to save her friends, which allowed the SSS to survive fighting Gwenter rather than die as they should have. Lloyd rejected their reasoning, saying that undoing the past to negate hardships was the same as stealing humanity's potential for growth and denying their efforts to overcome strife. Hearing Lloyd's words and plagued by guilt, Ian chose to step down from the project, but the Croy family's millennium-long delusion was too ingrained into Mariabel. She struck Ian down on the spot. Mariabel then took great pleasure telling the SSS that everyone's unconditional love for Kia was nothing more than her unconsciously manipulating causality. Kia begged her to stop, but Mariabelle continued, saying it was befitting that an artificial girl only be given artificial love. The thought of manipulating her loved ones was too much for Kia to bear, so she closed off her heart, causing her to fuse with the tree and to become the Azure Demiurgos, much to Mariabelle's delight. Disinterested in what Mariabelle had to say, it's Mariabelle, the SSS charged in, determined to break through the monstrosity that appeared before them and rescue Kia. But even once the Azure Demiurgos was defeated, Kia's heart remained closed, and she was on the verge of dissolving her own causality, just as the Septarian Mirage had. Lloyd ran into the void where Kia stood and entered the world of Zero, a place where all possible outcomes lie. There, he met his older brother Guy. Despite knowing there existed a world where he and his brother could be together, Lloyd said goodbye, staying true to the path he and his friends chose. With Guy's encouragement, he was then able to locate Kia in the darkness of the world of Ein Solf? Maybe? Lloyd reassured Kia that unconditional love was a natural thing, and that regardless of how it happened, nothing was going to change how they felt about her. Kia finally reverted to her original form and cried in Lloyd's arms as he picked her up to return to the real world. In the aftermath of the Azure Tree, Mariabelle, probably, accepted an offer to join Ouroboros as its new third Anguis, while Dieter and Ian both went to prison. Without the Septarians' power to protect it, Crossbell was quickly occupied by Erebonia and Chancellor Osborne, who survived his assassination attempt and returned to win the Erebonian Civil War. Thus, Crossbell began a long winter under Imperial rule. However, Lloyd and his friends remained resolved in the path they chose and never relented, no matter how many ordeals they faced or barriers they had overcome. After 2 long years, Crossbell was finally poised to regain its freedom once more. Okay, moving on to Trails of Cold Steel. These are significantly shorter, so these should go by pretty quickly. Alright, the year was 1204 of the Septian calendar, and all across Erebonia, spring was in bloom. Reem Schwarzer, the son of a ruling lord from the remote region of Emir, made his first steps into Trista to join the prestigious Thor's Military Academy. Little did he know that he would be taking part in a new class, Class 7, comprised of 9 promising young men and women. Together with their instructor, Sarah Valestein, he and his classmates traveled across a great deal of Erebonia, conducting a series of field studies to assist the local townships. It was through these conventional studies that they witnessed the deep divide between commoners and nobles, the hold the aristocracy had within the empire, and the hostility lurking just without from the Calvard Republic. Though tensions between noble and reformist factions were at an all-time high, they had still hope to enjoy Heimdall's summer festival, if only the terrorist C and his Imperial Liberation Front hadn't stormed the capital. In time, Class 7 welcomed 2 new students, Milliam Orion and Crow Armbrust. The bonds between the classmates continued to swell, but at the same time, Reem grew increasingly at odds with a mysterious power within him, a raging strength like that of an ogre. Yet, this internal strife felt as nothing compared to the overwhelming strife of the Empire. Chancellor Osborne's popularity continued to rise, and with it came rumors that nobles were in leagues with the Imperial Liberation Front. As fall arrived, the invigorated Crossbell state declared its independence, and were declared the vile culprits behind a monstrous attack that wiped the Empire's guerrilla fortress off the face of the map. The Chancellor made that to declare war through an impassioned speech, riveting his people, but before he could finish, a bang resounded, and he collapsed, a wound in his chest. The sniper was none other than the terrorist C, now unmasked as Crow Armbrust. It was then that the nobility, as the Noble Alliance, stormed the streets with giant humanoid machines to occupy the Erebonian capital. Class 7 rose to the occasion, defending the academy with all their might, only for their efforts to be for naught. It was then that Reen searched within and recalled another humanoid beast that dwelled beneath their feet. He called this beast forth by invoking its name, Valimar the Ashen Knight. Crow, however, had a beast to call his own. In the Azure Knight Ordine, he trounced Reen in a decisive clash. Their classmates witnessed it all, and knowing Reen to be their greatest chance at survival, threw themselves forth to give him a time to escape. Reen wished for anything but, crying out as he was forced to abandon those he had come to adore. On that day, the Erebonian Civil War had begun. Trails of Cold Steel 2. A month had passed since the Erebonian Civil War commenced. Reen awakened, pain coursing through his body, and rose to his feet. As he surveyed his surroundings, he realized he recognized this place. It was the Isengard Range, next to his hometown of Amir. Together with the Black Cat, Celine, and the Ashen Knight, he returned home, and trouble had followed. His father was gravely wounded in a brutal attack from the Noble Alliance's hired hands, and both Princess Alphine and his sister, Elise, were kidnapped by a strange girl clad in black. But in tragedy there was hope, for he also learned his beloved friends from Class 7 were still alive. Reen worked tirelessly to reunite with his classmates, meeting success with the exception of Crow. He would soon appear as well, however, in the midst of another raid upon Amir from the Noble Alliance. Its mighty airship, the Pantagruel, appeared, and Supreme Leader Duke Cayenne with it, to invite Reen aboard. Though Reen knew it to be a trap, he accepted the hope that he could save the princess and his sister. The Duke invited Reen to join the Alliance. As Reen contemplated what his next step should be, while surrounded by the enemy, Crow appeared to relay the reason behind his horrific acts of terrorism against the late Chancellor Osborne, as well as his past, deeply moving his former classmate's heart. Though the Pantagruel housed the Zephyr Corps, Ouroboros, and the ILF, Reen met with Princess Alphine, and Alphen, and pushed through their myriad defenses to escape to the deck, where the two were rescued by Class 7 aboard Prince Olivert's Courageous. The prince bequeathed them his airship, and they agreed to use it to find places in need and liberate them from Noble Alliance occupation. They succeeded through one conflict after another, eventually leading them to the freedom of Trista and the royal family at the Corel Imperial Villa. Yet their joy was short-lived. Crown Prince Cedric remained in the Duke's clutches, and Valflame Palace was transformed into something sinister. Class 7 trekked through this infernal castle, fending off one opponent after the next to reach the Vermilion Throne. They were greeted by Vida and Crow, weapons at the ready, and Duke Cayenne, whose twisted ambitions were now laid bare. Before they could stop him, he forced the Crown Prince into the Vermilion Knight's core to awaken the corrupted Vermilion apocalypse. Crow and Reen take to their divine knights to defeat this Vermilion demon lord. Though they managed to succeed, Crow was mortally wounded in the struggle, and a deeply heartbroken Class 7 surrounded him to impart their final goodbyes as he passed away. The Noble Alliance's Rufus Alberea then burst into the scene to arrest Duke Cayenne, using his true position as leader of the Chancellor's Ironbloods. Even as Chief of Staff of the Alliance and a son of nobility, he schemed in secret to sabotage them, under the direct orders of none other than the late Chancellor Osborne, who revealed himself to be very much alive. He declared his intentions to take over Ouroboros' phantasmal blaze plan in an act of war against them. But this meant nothing to Rien, who in his grief burned hot with anger at the revelation that his friend died in vain. In the face of this anger, the Chancellor merely responded, "I'm glad to finally see you again, my son. You've grown into a fine young man." 2 months passed. The Noble Alliance was snuffed out along with the war, and the Chancellor wasted no time ordering Erebonia to claim Crossbell as its own in a swift invasion. The Calvard Republic reacted in turn by sending their own troops in a counteroffensive. Rien, now known far and wide across the Erebonian Empire as the heroic Ashen Chevalier, was sent to Crossbell to fend them off. At the same time, a grand speech commenced to announce Rufus's appointment as the very first Governor General of Crossbell. The year was 1205 of the Septian calendar, and March officially signaled winter's end. The members of Class 7, each now armed with wonderful memories of a place they had come to love, elected to leave Thor's military academy, in hopes of reaching newfound dreams. The only one who chose to stay behind was Rien. Just before their train departed the station, they all promised to one day meet again. Trails of Cold Steel 3. In April 1206 of the Septian calendar, Rien disembarked a train to enter the modest town of Leaves. It would be his first day as an instructor of the brand new Thor's Military Academy branch campus, established by Prince Olivert. With 3 students under his care, Una Crawford, Kurt Vander, and Altina Orion, Rien was to lead them as part of Class 7 Special Operations, charged with various field missions involving intel gathering, surveillance, and supporting the locals. They received much-needed help from Rien's former classmates throughout these missions, for their time on the field seemed to grow more perilous by the day. Ouroboros met them at every turn, and a mysterious figure, Azure Siegfried, met them while claiming to be acting in lieu of the chief of the gnomes. But it wasn't this revelation that struck Rien so much as the man's striking resemblance to the late Crow Armbrust. 2 students joined new Class 7 in June, Muse Egret and Ash Carbide. It wasn't long after this that they encountered the Steel Maiden Arianrode, a stunning woman who leads the Stahlritter, while bearing the honor of being among Ouroboros' strongest. As she left them, she lingered on the Society's repetitious experiments bearing fruit. In July, the new Class 7 was sent to Heimdall to complete a mission of utmost importance, capturing a squad of Calvardian agents known as Hercules. They pursued these agents in the underground tunnels that took them to the Himmel Cemetery, where students of the main campus successfully apprehended them. Rien brought his students to the grave of a Crow Armbrust, noticing right away that the earth had been disturbed. Upon reporting this and having the grave exhumed, they were shocked to discover that it was empty. Not long after, the members of the old Class 7 reunited for the first time in over a year, celebrating with tears of joy before delving into their plans. They reasoned that Erebonia was heading into an all-out war against the Calvard Republic, and that they had to do everything they could to stop it while uncovering the dark secrets that lay beneath the Empire's surface. Their first step towards this goal was to defeat the dark dragon of ancient lore that lurked beneath Heimdall. With the guidance of the Hexen clan's leader, the Crimson Witch Rosalia, they plunged into its labyrinthine lair and succeeded with a plume. To celebrate their contributions in the capture of the Republican agents, both old and new Class 7 were invited to a party inside Valflame Palace. There, Rien met privately with Emperor Eugent III, who revealed the dark curse that plagued the Empire, and Chancellor Osborne, who unveiled how he cheated death, despite being shot in the heart. Suspicions arose when Rien returned to the party with Ash nowhere to be found. But it wasn't until a gunshot resounded that all were truly alarmed. Many rushed to find its source and were horrified to discover it. The Emperor had been shot, and Ash, now restrained by the Chancellor, was the gunman. Due to the gun's make, Ash was widely reported to be a Calvardian spy, and martial law was declared. Reen worried greatly for both him as well as Altina, who was forced away on orders from the Intelligence Division. Chancellor Osborne proclaimed the attack no less than a declaration of war, and as such enacted the National Mobilization Law to unite his citizens. In response to this, Class 7 met with Thomas of the church's Gralsritter, as well as Roselia, and they made the Chancellor's plan clear to bring about the Great Twilight and the end of the world. Before they could learn more, a bell chimed as pitch-black mana erupted from below Corel Imperial Villa, transforming it into the vile Grawl of Erebos. With friends and students by his side, Reen arrived at the Grawl of Erebos' lowest level, where Crown Prince Cedric and his Vermilion Knight, an unconscious Altina, Chancellor Osborne, and the Chief of the Gnomes, Black Alberic, not Alberea, awaited them. Though impossible to kill without a specifically forged weapon, they faced against a great holy beast, long corrupted after taking in a majority of the Empire's curse, in hopes of subduing and separating it from their enemies. As they realize the hopelessness of this tactic, the Courageous explodes, taking the lives of Prince Olivert, Viscount Arsaid, and Toval with it. The Crown Prince hoped to end Altina's life while Reen was compromised by the Holy Beast, but she awakened and escaped, rushing to defend her instructor first thing. Before the beast could strike her, Milliam also came to defend her little sister. The Holy Beast raised its great claw and slashed down upon Milliam, ending her life and transforming her into the sole weapon that can end its life in turn, the Sword of the End. Horrified by his dear friend's sacrifice, Reen fell into an uncontrollable rage, took the Sword of the Ender as Valimar, and killed the Holy Beast, unleashing the curse it housed within its form across all of Erebonia. He had brought about Great Twilight with his own hands. With Reen's rage seemingly impossible to sate, Crow, who regained his memories, in his Azure Knight, Rutger, in his Palatinate Knight, and Arianrode in her Argent Knight swooped down to surround and restrain him. The last to call his knight was Osborne, who revealed himself to be the Awakener of the Ebon Knight, Ishmelga. He then approached, lifting Reen by the neck and telling him, "Now, Reen, let us begin. Together we shall write the end to this wretched fairy tale, in ink black as despair." Then we had to wait forever. Trails of Cold Steel 4. The plans of Chancellor Osborne and Ouroboros came to fruition in the form of the Great Twilight, and its curse that drives citizens to take up arms and rush into conflict, spread throughout the Empire. 1 month later, the Erebonian government took advantage of these heightened emotions to declare all-out war against the Calvard Republic. After awakening from comas, brought on by draining their spiritual energy, Yuna, Kurt, and Altina found themselves in the mysterious Erin, a village led by the Hexen clan's Roselia, and home to many a witch. Old Class 7 was also present, feeling deeply crushed by their recent failures. It was only with new Class 7's encouragement that all regained their hope, and with it, they formed a plan to save Reen, whom they believed was being held captive by the Black Workshop. They traveled the continent to drive spirit stakes into various points known as singularities, their hope being these would eventually reveal the location of the Black Workshop. Along the way, they managed to reunite with Ash, who fled to Hummel after being captured, and Muse, also known as Mildine, who claimed her title as Duchess and formed the Viceland army. to oppose the government. Despite great opposition from Ouroboros, they successfully placed all the stakes, allowing them to locate and infiltrate the Black Workshop. At first, their awaited reunion with Reen is darkened by him having lost himself to the overwhelming shadow of his own power, but through impassioned pleas, they were able to bring him back and escape. The full party, led by Reen, wasted no time traveling to the Soul Shrine to meet with Crow. There, they discovered Osborne's true objective, the rivalries, as a series of ceremonies that pit the Divine Knights against one another in order to awaken the Septarian of Steel. Reen and Crow's Ashen and Azure Knights engage in this ceremony. The Ashen Knight emerged victorious, and having fulfilled his purpose as an immortal, Crow began to fade away. Reen, however, used his powers granted to him by the rivalries to bind Crow's existence to his own, saving him. The heroes later received an invitation from the Pantagruel, and there Muse presided over a meeting of leaders from the Liberal Kingdom, the Principality of Remeferia, and the Calvard Republic. She proposed a plan to resist Osborne's Operation Jormungand, Operation Mille Mirage, and all present were inspired to move forward with it. Reen and company were offered roles in this plan, but the heroes instead opted to take a third path that would avoid major conflict between countries. As if to shatter the hopes of this progress, Ouroboros infiltrated the meeting. However, the day is saved by the appearance of the Courageous Two, piloted by none other than Prince Olivert, who was thought dead. After the heroes board the Courageous Two and successfully evade Ouroboros, they find the spectral moon mirror. Through its ability to reveal the truth behind the many mysteries surrounding the Empire, they not only learn that Osborne is a reincarnation of Emperor Drakel's the Lionheart, but they discover that the origin of the curse engulfing the land is the Divine Knight Osborne now pilots. The truth now clear, Reen resolves to participate in the rivalries to defeat the one who started it all, Ishmelga the Ebon Knight. The heroes traveled to the shrines where the ceremonial battles were fated to take place. Reen then fought and defeated Rutger piloting Zector, the Palatinate Knight, and Aryan Road piloting Argreon, the Argent Knight. 2 days before the war, the skies are darkened by the unveiling of Tuatha de Danann, the Imperial Fortress, the final stage for the rivalries. After a precious day spent celebrating bonds with loved ones, the first shots of war are fired, and Operations Jormungand and Mille Mirage are enacted. Reen and company are joined by heroic companions like Estelle and Lloyd to take on the Imperial Fortress as a team. While en route to its heart, Reen encounters Prince Cedric and Rufus, awakeners of Testarossa, the Vermilion Knight, and El Prado, the Auric Knight. He conquered against each of these adversaries before meeting face-to-face with the Awakener of the Ebon Knight, his father. The two crossed swords in a fierce clash filled with emotion. Not long after, victory goes to Reen. Their next move was to abolish the source of the curse. The heroes wielded the power of the earthen prison, bequeathed by the Holy Beast of Earth, to manifest Ishmelga's malice into physical form, putting everything they had into defeating this final foe. They won. The accursed twilight that wrought the Empire was finally banished, and the battle across Zemiria's soil ground to a halt. With the reason for their existences now fulfilled, Crow and Milliam, the latter of whom lived in On as Valmar's blade, began to fade away. But not before the Divine Knights used the last of their power given to them by Adios to save their lives, bringing about a true miracle. It was on that day they had successfully put an end to the wretched fairy tale, carving a new path toward a happy ending. The summary certainly lacks things such as the death of Aryan Road and the wedding at the end between Olivert and Shara. But it's fine. It's fine. These weren't meant to completely summarize everything in the game. They're just giving you a rough idea. I'm not even sure how relevant some of it's going to be in Reverie, but overall, nothing's going to beat playing the game yourself. But this is a good start to that. All right, there is one more thing to do, and it's going to be long. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit different than the other ones. Apparently, the 3 and 9 books that you find throughout Trails of Cold Steel 4 are important to this game's story. They actually gave us a menu option to go through and read all of 3 and 9. I don't know why. I'm assuming these characters are real and they're actually going to appear in the game in some form. So I am going to go through this. I personally don't know what it's going to be, but this is very long. I just quickly tapped through these. 21 pages, 28 pages. It's gonna be a bit. So, strap in. Chapter 1, The Butler and the Lady. A single-passenger ship of prodigious size lay anchored in the port town in the northeast of the Principality of Reverie, extravagantly crafted from top to bottom. A single glance was enough to discern its intended clientele, the privileged few among society's upper crust. True to appearances, the passengers boarding the vessel that day most certainly fit the bill, each smartly dressed and adorned in conspicuous opulence. Even among such guests, however, two stood out, a young lady possessed of regal air and the butler at her side. Judging from their dress and behavior and linguistic register, they suited the setting to a prim and proper T. The single fact that set them apart from the other guests was their age. Neither looked to be much older than 12 or perhaps 13 years old, making them mere children in the eyes of most. Just a moment, my lady. The young butler labored to keep pace with the young lady as he dragged a large suitcase behind him. Despite this, she continued to stride forward, not slowing her pace in the slightest. Exhaustion creased his weary brow. His attire was proper, as befitting his station, but his unkempt hair, grown out long enough to completely obscure his eyes, was another story. On top of that, everything about his demeanor screamed that he was timid and weak of spirit. "Snap to it, you dullard," the young lady brusquely shouted, now several paces ahead of the struggling boy. "If you can't make those legs move any faster, I'll cut them off and feed them to the hounds." She continued to increase her pace while assailing her butler with an unending string of contemptuous words. Her arrogant, haughty demeanor stood in stark contrast to her graceful appearance. Dressed in a lovely black-frilled dress, her blue eyes shone like a pair of sparkling sapphires, and her twin pigtails curled slightly in perfect arcs. Most eye-catching of all, however, was the 50 red stuffed bear she held close to her chest. Though it was large enough to draw attention, it didn't look out of place in the arms of such a girl as her. Please, my lady, forgive me." In response to the girl's tirade, the boy miserably sputtered excuses and breathlessly pled for leniency as he summoned his remaining strength to pick up his pace. After a not insubstantial trip, the two finally arrived at the ship's boarding gate. "May I please see your invitation and boarding passes?" the crew member working at the gate asked, smiling politely. Up close, the ship was even more opulent, a prized possession of the Verne Company. Its main route was between Reverie and the Calvard Republic, via Lamelin Bay. For this particular trip, the entire ship had been reserved by one Huldor Barn, a wealthy merchant from Calvard. Passengers hoping to board required both a standard boarding pass as well as an explicit invitation from Barn himself. However, as each invitation included the room information for the guests in question, the boarding pass was strictly a formality. Gray, the girl called the boy by name and gestured with her hand, implicitly ordering him to present their credentials. Yes, my lady. What do you require of me? The boy asked, having completely failed to grasp his employer's unspoken instructions. You cannot possibly be this dense, you stupid worm, she snapped. Oh, I'm so sorry, my lady. I beg your forgiveness. Cowering before the young lady's vicious glare, the boy stuttered and stammered 1,000 apologies. Silence, the invitation and boarding pass, now. Right away, my lady. The boy began busily rustling through the contents of the suitcase, frantically searching for the requisite papers. Yet his haste quickly proved to be his downfall, for no sooner had he located the pass than a sudden gust of wind blew past, tearing the paper from his hand. Oh no, he exclaimed. The boy instinctively threw out his arms, stretching them to their physical limit, but his efforts were in vain. The boarding pass fluttered down to the bottom of the harbor, coming to rest gently on the water surface. As though that wasn't bad enough, misfortune continued to hound the boy as a number of silhouettes swiftly appeared. Beneath the waterlogged document, a school of fish jumped into the air with a splash, spraying out water all about. They then descended back into the harbor steps, taking the hapless butler's boarding pass along with them. Ah, no! The boy's grief-stricken cry resonated throughout the harbor. Trembling with fear, he turned to face his master, prepared for an eruption of anger, followed by a vicious tirade of abuse. Yet it did not come immediately. The girl simply stood there in silence. She stared long and hard at the boy, her face betraying no expression whatsoever. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke. This was the calm before the storm. The boy began spitting out apologies, tripping over his words as his voice grew weaker by the second, like a short-circuited radio, warbling, "It's death now." His body seemed to shirk, and his shoulders slumped like a criminal awaiting judgment. "You're absolutely useless!" The girl's anger finally burst forth in one violent blast. Despite the ferocity of her exclamation, she managed to save enough breath to launch a sharp kick at the boy in the same moment. The well-aimed strike sent the boy flying farther than her petite frame would suggest was possible. He seemed to hang in the air for a brief moment before resuming his journey downward, off the edge of the pier, reaching a frigid end as he broke the water's surface with a splash. As soon as he returned to his senses, he began violently thrashing his arms about, pleading for aid, between coughing up mouthfuls of cold water. "My lady, please help me," he begged, his thrashing growing more desperate and frantic. "You're gonna find that pass, and I mean now. You're not gonna leave the water until I see it in your hands." "But I can't swim," he burbled. Burbled? As his head began to slowly sink beneath the surface. "I'm well aware. Please, his words were cut short as though his lungs filled with water, and the rest of his head bobbed below the surface. His thrashing ceased as his silhouette grew faint, as he quickly plummeted downward to the bottom of the bay. With the situation having reached an unacceptable level of risk, several onlooking crew members ran over to rescue the waterlogged Butler. The moment the boy made it out of the bay, however, the still enraged girl tried to kick him right back in again. "Miss, please, you must calm down," the crew member at the gate said, trying to pacify the young noble. How can I be calm about this? My father was unable to attend, so I am here in his place. There are important business discussions taking place on the ship that I cannot afford to miss. And now, thanks to a certain someone's rank incompetence, that's exactly what's going to happen." The girl gave the boy a menacing glare, so virulent, it could have stripped the paint from an entire vessel. "Tell me, Worm, how exactly you're going to take responsibility for me being unable to board?" Well, there's a good picture of it. Though the boy was still coughing and violently spewing water, his already pallid face managed to lose what little color remained in it upon hearing those words. Feeling pity for the boy, the gate attendant stepped in. "Well, for the time being, may I see your invitation instead?" The boy moved to comply with this request, but was stopped dead in his tracks by the girl's menacing scowl. She produced the invitation herself and roughly shoved it at the attendant. The attendant read over the paper and then went through the list of names on the guest list. This invitation is for Baron Kreis Reinhardt, who I can confirm is indeed on the guest list. Might I presume you two are his daughter and attendant? You presume correctly. I am Baron Reinhardt's eldest daughter, Celia Reinhardt. The gate attendant made a respectful bow before continuing to speak. Then there will be no need to further concern yourself with the matter of the boarding pass, Miss Reinhardt. You may proceed. Oh, we may? Strictly speaking, a decision of this nature required approval from a higher-ranking employee. But in this case, the gate attendant decided that swift action was the best way to provide a peaceful solution to the rapidly worsening situation at hand. It seems as though you'll live to writhe another day, you useless worm. Count yourself lucky. The girl boarded the ship, still staring icy daggers at her butler. He dragged their luggage on after her, still wheezing and dripping wet from the events of the past few minutes. He effusively expressed his gratitude to the gate attendant as he passed, receiving a sympathetic smile and a few words of encouragement. Having finally boarded the ship, the two youths immediately headed for their room. Their pace was quick, as though they already knew the way, and not a single word was exchanged between them as they briskly walked down the halls. Once they arrived, they gave the room a quick yet thorough search. Infiltration complete. The girl broke their silence, suddenly speaking in a sleepy drawl. Her eyelids drooped, and she let out a mighty yawn, not a trace remaining of the tense, high-handed young lady from a few moments ago. I'm beat ass. I think I'm gonna take a nap. She tossed her plush bear onto the bed and immediately launched herself at it after it. She dove under the covers with childlike exuberance, befitting someone her age, perhaps even younger. In contrast to her whimsical new demeanor, the boy remained completely expressionless. Don't let your guard down. The real mission begins now. His voice was alarmingly calm and terse as he brushed aside his bangs, still wet from the frigid water of the harbor. His now visible eyes were cold and sharp. Beneath that, however, was the gleam of a hunter fixed on its prey. Each and every reg of his body exuded composure. Oh, but you look a lot older than 13 there. Flustered. The flustered, stammering butler from before was nothing but a memory. Though the girl's transformation was strange, the boy's sudden shift in personality was nothing short of jarring. That really wasn't your best work out there, S. Far from it. She spoke nonchalantly, rolling in around the bed as she critiqued the boy's performance. He remained silent for a moment before speaking, almost as though he agreed with her assessment, at least in part. At least it didn't affect the mission. But you overdid each and every reaction. It's not that easy to match that without seeming unnatural, you know. You hamming it up like that made us stand out more than we needed to. Despite her words, the girl's half-hearted tone took the bite out of her criticisms. These were the duo's true personalities, the upper-class young lady and her bumbling butler making a spectacle at the boarding gate were simply elaborate pageantries. Acts necessary for gaining entry to the ship, and nothing more. Any other method of infiltration might have raised suspicion, endangering the mission. Thus, they chose to board under false identities. They have made clever use of the organization's info network beforehand, ascertaining which of the invitees would be unable to attend. Armed with this bit of intel, they created their personas. The invitations required for boarding were printed on high-quality paper, but ultimately differed, only in name. Using the same layout for each invitation was a logical choice for a merchant looking to pinch Mira whenever possible. Logical or not, that particular decision made the necessary forgery a walk in the park. The boarding pass, on the other hand, was a different story. The Verne Company was known to employ cutting-edge technology to prevent forgeries. Attempting to use a fake pass to board was an act accompanied by a considerable amount of risk. This is why the two engineered the dramatic performance that took place at the boarding gate. The boy dropped their boarding pass. Dropping it was, of course, an intentional act. Both the gusts of wind and timely group of fish were the result of a battle ornament the girl kept hidden in her stuffed bear. A clever method she had used many times in the past to cast arts unnoticed. All of their hard work had paid off. The infiltration had gone exactly as planned. It was yet another successful operation for the boy, known as Three of Swords, and the girl, known as Nine of Swords, in their life as professional assassins. Chapter 2, 3 and 9. At its scheduled time, the ship departed. As he watched the shoreline shrink into a distance, Three of Swords spoke in a cold, flat voice. Target presence confirmed. Have we pinpointed enemy position? Is our route prepared? Yep, we're good to go. The young girl, known as Nine of Swords, stood behind the boy, answering in a relaxed drawl, the polar opposite of her partner's icy tone. Having been dispatched by the organization, the two laid the groundwork for their mission, the assassination of the man responsible for this voyage, the wealthy merchant, Haldor Barn. I think that's how you say it. The organization was not particular about how they dealt with their targets, whether in swift silence or via raucous violence. Their only real concern was making sure they did not draw attention to the Bracer Guild or the local police. As a hard rule, 3 and 9 would always select the most efficient method available to them. In this case, their mission was to prevent the ship from arriving in Calvard, with Haldor still alive on it. Haldor had strong ties with Hayaway, a sizable criminal organization in the Republic. Should he safely make it to his destination and take refuge under their protection, his extraction and subsequent elimination would prove an exceptionally difficult task. Aside from the engine area, the ship had 3 main floors. The lowest housed a considerable number of general passengers. Naturally, this is where 3 and 9's rooms were located. 3 and 9's room was located. The second floor contained a hall used for parties, banquets, and meals, as well as other such events. Finally, the third floor featured luxury rooms prepared specifically for noble use. At present, however, the entirety of the floor was reserved by Haldor, who was enjoying the comforts of the room in the farthest back. 3 and 9 put their equipment and tools in order and then sprang into action. Their plan was to head to the hall on the second floor, but not before leaving a little gift on the first. The hall would be packed with passengers once dinner service began. Given that only the ultra-wealthy and those with noble status were in attendance, the menu was likely to be suitably extravagant. Yet, once they arrived, they found that Haldor had not elected to appear. An act of caution, perhaps? This was expected, however, and the two took their planned positions in the central area of the room. It's time. 3's quiet murmur was immediately followed by the din of an explosion from the floor below. The passengers began to panic, but their fear slowly subsided to uneasiness as security personnel deployed and headed to the first floor to investigate the situation. In truth, the explosion had been caused by a small makeshift bomb that 3 and 9 had planted in an unoccupied room. The blast wasn't particularly powerful, but it was enough to ignite a number of small fires in the area. Their goal was to lure out security, and in that regard, the bomb had more than served its purpose. The plan was progressing apace. "Guess I'm up," 9 said to her. "Guess I'm up," 9 said in her usual lackadaisical drawl. She gathered up the edges of her skirt in her hands and gently swayed it back and forth, resulting in a number of black spheres thudding to the floor. A series of muffled pops reverberated throughout the hall, heralding a cloud of smoke and tear gas that quickly filled the room. "What's going on? I can hardly breathe. My eyes are tearing up." The gas wasn't especially strong and would have no lasting effect on its victims. However, it was more than enough to send the already uneasy group of elites into a full-blown panic. 3 and 9 then began the next stage of their plan, their infiltration of the third floor. Currently, the bulk of the security was on the first floor, meaning they would have to pass all the way through the second in order to respond to any emergencies at the top of the ship. The large numbers of panicking passengers on the second floor wouldn't stall security for long, but the situation would buy 3 and 9 all the time they would need. So far, the assassin's plan had gone flawlessly. Still, that didn't mean killing Haldor would be easy once they reached him. The two hid themselves in the stairwell on the 3rd floor and scattered ahead. Two more there. From what I can see, it looks like we'll have to find... we'll have 5 to deal with. 9 shared her observations with 3 in a hushed tone. He silently nodded in acknowledgement. One look at the men standing guard ahead was enough to tell them they were neither typical passengers nor ship security. They were well armed, and their combat experience was practically carved into their hardened faces. Ex-Jaegers, huh? It was clear they had not been hired. They had been hired not to protect the general guests, but to personally attend to Haldor. Given that his room was located in the very back of the ship, it meant that the only way to reach him was through the battle-hardened veterans that currently barred 3 and 9's path. Avoiding a fight simply wasn't in the cards this time. I'll take lead. As she said this, 9 began to casually walk forward, her posture relaxed. She made no attempt to hide her approach, and even when the guards heard her soft footsteps and turned to look, they didn't register her as a threat. An advantage afforded her by her candy-sweet exterior. "Little lady, you're not allowed up here without permission," one of the guards said in a gravelly voice. "Yeah, we know there's been some kind of disturbance downstairs," another chimed in, "but this ain't an evacuation site. Get yourself back to your room." Their tone was a bit harsh, but considering they used to be Jaegers, their attitude towards 9 was almost amicable. She gestured towards Haldor's room. "But I want to go in there, pretty please." 9 wasn't putting on the spoiled noble act she had used to sneak aboard the ship earlier in the day. This was probably as close to her genuine sleepy intonation as she would allow during a mission. "You want to meet with Mr. Haldor, do ya? Well, today ain't your lucky day, kid, because we got some strict orders not to let anyone in this room." "And there's nothing I can do to change your mind?" 9 tilted her head as she spoke, her presence beginning to unnerve the guards. "Nope, nothing," one of them finally responded. "Oh, I see. That really is too bad." Despite her words, 9 didn't seem especially disappointed by their response. Taking her plush bear in hand, she suddenly thrust it out in front of her. There was a flash of silver and a loud whip, followed by the thud of the 2 guards collapsing onto the ground. Their necks had each been pierced by 2 needles, which had been tipped in poison, a specialty of 9's and her mainstay in combat. Ordinarily hidden within the bear, the needles could be used to quickly disperse various types of poison throughout a target's body when thrown at a vital point. 9 would typically carry up to 10 types of poisons, each suitable for a different situation. Depending on the circumstances, she would even use poison-free needles on occasion. This time, 9 had struck in the 2 bodyguards with a neurotoxin that robbed the body of its ability to move freely. While not strong enough to kill, it was definitely enough to immobilize someone of substantial size for a good while. "What the?" Having sensed something amiss, one of the remaining bodyguards down the hall turned to see what was happening. Oh, I'm loving the art on here. Turned to see what was happening. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a figure quickly moving in his direction. Before he could figure out what was happening, however, a blade flashed before his eyes, and he was on the ground, incapacitated along with his comrades. The swift takedown was executed by 3. He wielded a longsword with a thin blade that appeared sharp enough to cut the very air around it. Its construction resembled that of traditional Eastern swords, albeit with a straight blade instead of a typical curved one. Its design was surprisingly ornate, and curiously enough, it seemed to be missing a hilt guard and part of the blade near its base. The two remaining bodyguards had seen what had happened, and had each already dropped into a fighting stance. No matter how youthful their opponents, it was clear they had no intention of pulling their punches. "You little bastards," yelled one of them as he began swinging his axe downward. 3 met the attack with his sword, locking the assassin and the bodyguard in place. Seeing an opening, the other bodyguard drew his sword and attempted to stab 3. While still holding the axe in place with his right hand, 3 quickly drew a short sword with his left, using it to deflect the second bodyguard's attack in one clean motion. The short sword resembled the long sword in nearly all aspects but length. Unlike the long sword, it had a hilt guard. However, it seemed incomplete somehow, as though it was missing a piece. It was much less of an offensive weapon than the longsword, being mainly used for defense. Despite his best efforts to fend off the attackers, it seemed as though 3 would be quickly overpowered. Even for him, it was difficult to hold back the weight of an attack from a grown man with only his right hand. Sensing that he needed to do something quickly, 3 intentionally stopped pushing back on the axe, deflecting it harmlessly to the side. With his remaining strength, he whipped around to face his staggering assailant and plunged the short sword deep in his torso. The other bodyguard quickly launched a flurry of attacks, but 3 pushed the critically wounded axe wielder into his comrade. The sword-wielding bodyguard was momentarily taken off guard, and 3 capitalized on the opening, cutting him down with both swords. Right, that should be. 3 turned to notify 9 that the guards had all been dispatched, but as he did, he saw the door to the VIP room open behind her. Out stepped another ex-Jaeger, weapon drawn, his sights set on attacking the defenseless 9 while her guard was down. Too much space separated them for 3 to warn 9 in time. He pushed off his back heel with all his might but stopped his dash a split second later, as did the final bodyguard. "You're sharp. I was wondering how long it'd take you to catch on." 9 turned lazily on her heel and cast a derisive glance over her shoulder. Her expression remained unfazed as thin red stripes appeared over the Jaeger's arms and legs, blood beginning to trickle out like sanguine tears. "Better not move. Wriggle too much and you'll be leaving in more pieces than you arrived." Her sweet appearance made her remarks all the more disconcerting and ghastly. The ex-Jaeger understood that this was no empty threat. He truly couldn't afford to take another step. The cause of his painful predicament was a web of superfine steel threads surrounding him. Thanks to their special processing, the threads were roughly as sharp as a drawer full of top-end kitchen knives. 9 had laid a trap outside the door, one that an unassuming person would have been hard-pressed to detect with the naked eye. Any unfortunate soul who had tried to pass through would, with any degree of speed, would have found themselves the centerpiece of a grisly, blood-splattered tableau. The threads were connected to specially designed needles 9 had used as their main weapon. Such thread was notoriously difficult to use, and it was rarely regarded as being sufficiently powerful to use as one's only mean of attack. While there were rumors of true masters who needed no other implements to eliminate their target, 9 had yet to attain such a level of skill with them. That said, she was still a menace in her own right, and fiendishly clever master of traps besides. As the ex-Jaeger had just learned, 9 tossed a poisoned needle at her immobilized foe with minimal effort, and her hapless victim collapsed to the floor. She tilted her head to the side as she noticed 3 staring at her. "What? Is something wrong?" she asked, using the nickname she preferred to call 3 by. She would often refer to herself as N, which 3 took as a shortened version of 9, but when she spoke of 3, she would use S instead of T. He'd assumed it to be short for swords. Despite the word being part of both of their names, but never bothered to ask. Nothing at all. 3 tersely responded as he turned to face the VIP door. At last, the pair stepped into the room housing their target, Haldor Barn. Chapter 3. Inside the room was opulence made manifest, the best of the best, enough to make the wealthiest noble envious. In the center of its spacious layout sat Haldor Barn, reclined on a sofa. He brought a glass of wine to his lips as his features twisted in a wry, unpleasant expression. Absolute incompetence. Such a simple job, and yet, apparently, one completely beyond them. Mr. Barn had fully grasped the situation. He had given the order that no one be allowed in the room, but there were now 2 children standing before him. Given the commotion outside, it had been easy to guess what had happened. Though their appearances made it hard to believe, the 2 standing before him were no doubt professional assassins, here for his life. Still, Haldor maintained his composure. He kept this realization hidden, refusing to allow so much as a hint of panic to creep into his features. The source of the confidence was a certain colossal machine that sat on the floor before him. Its mere presence made even the impossibly spacious room feel cramped. It towered over 2 arg in height, with 6 spider-like legs protruding from its body. Its humanoid upper half stood erect, with 4 menacing arms stretching out from it. The entire machine emitted an eerie glow, making for a most intimidating sight to behold. Looks like Duke Cayenne. Wowee, that's a big one, Nine remarked, glancing up at it. An archaism, 3 exclaimed, immediately shifting to a battle stance. This beauty is a new favorite of mine, a rather fruitful find at a recent back-alley auction I happened to attend. And it wasn't cheap, let me tell you. But no, I didn't stop there. I'm a man who doesn't do things by half measures. I paid a princely sum to have it outfitted with the most cutting-edge technology available. Mere well spent, in my opinion. I dare say it has enough firepower to easily wipe out an entire platoon of soldiers if I wanted to. In fact, it'd be mere child's play. Barely able to contain his smug grin, Haldor looked like a boastful child showing off his expensive toy at school. So, the bums outside were just bouncers, then, and this monstrosity is actually what's here to protect you, 3 deduced. Oh, a sharp one. That's precisely correct, Haldor said gleefully. As long as I have it by my side, my safety here is guaranteed, and once I make it to the Republic, I'll be untouchable. He let out a long laugh, his voice rising higher and higher, echoing endlessly throughout the gaudy chamber. Shockingly stupid. He really is an idiot, huh? The duo's comments weren't born from simple overconfidence. Even if they did somehow fail in their mission, and even if Haldor did somehow manage to make it to Hayaway territory, he had already been marked for death by the organization. They would pursue him to the bitter end. To the last man, he had 0 chance of survival. Attack! As at Haldor's orders, the archaism lurched into action. It set its sights on 3, charging straight for him. A 9 took the opportunity to begin casting her arts. While her partner specialized in close-quarter combat, she was a force to be reckoned with when it came to orbital arts. As she began the charge, however, one of the archaism's arms rapidly folded out into a gun, the muzzle pointed at 9's direction. Without delay, it sprayed a hail of bullets at her. Whoa! 9 evaded the gunfire by a hair's breadth, but was forced to abandon casting her art. The archaism focused its attention back on 3, who was busy fending off its melee attacks with his longsword. 9 sprinted to the other side of the room and started casting again. The machine's aim was too adept, however, and she found herself unable to escape it long enough to get an art off. It appeared that their foe was equipped with a powerful arts detection sensor, one that allowed it to identify incoming orbital attacks and counter before they could be launched. Forced to abandon her casting yet again, Nine screwed up her face in frustration and sullenly gripped her plush bear. This thing doesn't play nice. I quit, she said in a huff. It was a fair point. Poison-tipped needles wouldn't have been particularly effective against a steel plating of a machine, and without the ability to cast her arts, Nine found herself at a loss. 3, however, remained unperturbed and readied himself for another onslaught. I'm gonna grab a little shut-eye. Wake me when the fighting's over, okay? 9 said as she flopped down on one of the room's sofas, using her bear as a pillow. 9, cut it out. I need you to stay awake, 3 shouted from across the room. Despite this, 9 didn't react at all. As she dozed, the Archasm seemed to disregard her as a threat, and fully focus his attention on 3. Its forearms transformed into a sword, a lance, an axe, and a gun, proceeded to launch a relentless string of attacks at an already overwhelmed assassin. 3 leapt out of the way of the machine's sword arm, cut an arc through the air, only to then see the lance rocketing towards him. He narrowly avoided it, but his escape path was blocked by the mighty swing of an axe. Meanwhile, the Archasm had its guns trained on Haldor's direction. Even in the heat of combat, it prioritized protecting its master against any approaching threat. Swift movements and deft swordplay were the foundation of 3's combat style, but they were little use against such a powerful machine. The Archasm was simply too fast, and its attacks were both explosively powerful and aimed in with deadly precision. Further, its 6 legs afforded it perfect balance, and its multiple arms allowed it to launch attacks faster than 3 could keep up. To his irritation, 3 found his skill set completely useless against the metal monstrosity. Sure, he was a better fit for the task than 9, but only by a slim margin. Regardless, he continued the fight, both blades flashing as they moved to intercept his foe. The sheer number of attacks coming at him forced 3 to focus entirely on defense. He parried, dodged, and deflected the relentless waves of strikes, biding his time, waiting for the machine to leave an opening for him to strike with his longsword. His violent dance continued on for some time. 3 had managed to land a number of blows on the machine's body and its arms, but each had resulted in no more than a metallic twang, as his blade was repelled by its solid metal armor. Ha! It's no use, child. That armor was specially commissioned, and your pathetic little butter knives don't have a snowball's chance in Gehenna against them. Haldor's mocking tone grated on 3's nerves. It was made worse by the fact it was clear he wasn't lying. 3's attacks had been completely ineffective so far. Still, 3 had yet to suffer any wounds. Given how things were going, though, it was only a matter of time before he slowly worn down. Analysis complete, and 9 suddenly began speaking, apparently having woken up from her nap. Still lounging on the sofa, though, she continued, her voice flatter and more precise than usual. Arms, joint 1, down 5 reg, legs, joint 2, up 3 reg, waist, rotation axis center, left side of chest, up 2/5, left 1/5. The first to respond was not 3, but Haldor. You little wench. How did you know that? How did you do that? He was flustered, clearly shocked that 9 had figured out the Archasm's structural weak points. 9 slowly rose from the sofa and reverted back to her usual drawl, sleepily rubbing her eyes as she spoke. I could tell by the sound. It takes a bit of concentration, though. Pure disbelief was etched into Haldor's face. 3, on the other hand, looked as composed as ever. He had known from the start what 9 was doing. He was simply buying time until the analysis was complete. Now. Right. 3 readied himself and rushed the Archasm. His swordplay swifter than ever, a veritable tornado of slashes and stabs. Each of his attacks hit upon one of the weak points that 9 had pointed out. He suddenly switched to his short sword and performed the same volley of attacks, hitting each point a second time, but the result was the same as before. Nothing save the same high-pitched metallic sound that rang out with each hit. It didn't appear that the Archasm had been damaged in the slightest. Haldor was beside himself with laughter. relishing watching the young assassin struggle. What a joke. You can swing those little swords of yours until the palms come home, but you're never getting through that armor. All part of the process. Letting this simple reply linger in the air, 3 lined up his short sword with an empty section in the base of his longsword. The 2 blades locked into place, becoming a single weapon, their sharp edges lining up perfectly. At first glance, it would be difficult to tell the 2 were ever anything other than a single sword. Haldor watched the process with interest, but then burst into mocking laughter a moment later. Proud of your pocket knife, little boy? Do you honestly think that will be your ticket to victory? Truth be told, even in its combined state, the reach of 3 sword hadn't improved any, nor was the weapon any sharper or faster. The slightly increased weight of the blade may provide some increased power, but certainly not enough to break through the Archaism's thick armor. Given the opponent at hand, the weapon truly seemed a little better than a toy. The 3 chose to remain silent and let his weapon do the talking. He swung it at a weak point on the Archaism's legs, the same spot he had targeted before. This time, however, his strike was followed by a loud explosion, and the Archaism's leg flew across the room. The blast seemed to have come from within the Archaism itself, and was powerful enough to have blown its limbs clean off. At a glance, it seemed similar to a fire element art, but neither 3 or 9 had appeared to cast anything. Even if they had, the Archaism's sensors would surely have detected it. What the? Haldor stammered, his face twisted with shock and fear. Another swing by 3's sword, followed by another explosion, and a second of the Archaism's limbs was sent flying to the corner of the room. What the hell is going on? Haldor screeched, no longer trying to hide his panic. His tone quickly deteriorated from alarm to abject terror. This is no ordinary sword, 3 began to speak, his face devoid of expression. It's fully integrated with a battle ornament, forming a single weapon. Well, strictly speaking, I suppose it's closer to an ordinary ornament than a battle ornament. The location and timing specifications were complicated, as was the use of the specialized ornament in conjunction with some automated processing. The end result was an instantaneous cast, however. If the wielder was skilled enough, they'd be able to launch powerful art attacks without the need for any charge-up period. It was in this ability that the true value of 3's weapons lay. But having suffered an enormous amount of damage from the rapid strikes unleashed on it, the Archaism began throwing sparks in all directions. It began to dawn on Haldor that victory was no longer an option for him, and he began desperately looking for a means to escape. Stop fighting and get me out of here now, he ordered the Archaism in a shrill yell. Reacting to its new orders, the machine quickly rotated its torso and began moving towards him. I don't think so, a lazy voice called out from across the room. During the commotion, its remaining spider legs had been bound with a complex web of steel threads, rendering it immobile. This is the end. 3 quickly struck its remaining weak points in rapid succession. The resulting series of explosions tore the machine to pieces, littering its surroundings with burnt steel and charred components. When the smoke had cleared, the room was so filled with broken parts, it was more scrapyard than sweet. What remained of the Archaism's body ceased all function and collapsed, its chassis mangled beyond recognition. The 3 deftly wove his way through the junk scattered at his feet, silently moving towards Haldor. Stay back! A pitiful squeak escaped Haldor's throat as he scrambled backward, away from the approaching assassin. There was nowhere to run, however. 3's mission was nearing its end, yet he didn't feel happiness or even relief. He took a step closer. He felt his sword suddenly grow heavy in his hand. He forced himself to take another step. His legs felt like they were encased in concrete. His whole body felt like it was desperately rejecting his advance, trying to pull itself away. Another step. This was how it always ended. All that remained was for him to fulfill his role. He was nothing but a tool, a machine. This was how it was supposed to be. 3 took one final step forward. There's no need to share any details with you. I figure you at least deserve to know who's ending your life. To know, 3 thought to himself, whose name to curse as you burn in the fires of Gehenna. I am the 3 of Swords. He plunged his blade into Haldor's chest, piercing the man's heart. I'm an assassin for the organization. Just the. By this point, the panic on the second floor had largely subsided, and the ship's security were finally starting to move up to the 3rd floor. Picking up on this, 3 and 9 quietly broke open the window and jumped through it to the sea outside. It's a good thing this mission wasn't on an airship. That would have made escaping way more of a pain, 9 remarked. Agreed. She was right. Escaping from an airship would have necessitated a specialized aircraft for the operation, as well as forcing the 2 to leap from ship to ship midair. It wouldn't have been entirely impossible for the young assassins, though, and surely someone in their wide world had carried out such an operation before. 9 softly called out to 3, again using her preferred nickname for him. He was a corrupt man, an evil man. The 2 of them looked back towards the ship. There was no need for further explanation between the 2. Yeah, 3 said, quietly. I know. He had been thorough in reading through the mission dossier, and knew that 9 spoke the truth. Haldor was a bastard through and through, one that had performed all kinds of horrible acts in the pursuit of Mira. His mere existence sullied the world, and society was better off with him no longer a part of it. Not that it matters either way. When it came down to it, a hit was a hit. A target could be a person, the purest of heart on the continent, or it's the scummiest bottom feeder imaginable. If an assassination order came in from the organization, 3 and 9 followed it. That's how it always was. I guess. 9 went silent. She took something out of her plush bear and began blowing into it. It gradually took the shape of an inflatable raft, big enough for 1. 9 climbed aboard it and flopped down, once again using her bear as a pillow. I'm gonna catch another few winks. I'll leave this part to you, S, okay? This part meant for 3 to swim them both to shore. Your legs work just fine, he retorted. Do it yourself. Despite his words, 3 felt a twinge of something resembling affection in his heart. He and 9 had been operating together for over a year by this point. She was a little younger than him, and he sometimes found himself thinking of her as more a little sister than just a partner. Their natural rapport aside, she was also someone he could truly rely on during their missions. Despite this, 3 understood the situation. He understood that even if 9 was his partner, even if he thought of her as a little sister, he could never let his guard down. He could never truly trust her. Chapter 4, 3 of Swords. They haunt me relentlessly. All the people I've murdered over the years. I've cut off their head, carved their hearts from their chest, sliced their torsos right through the middle. But no matter what I do, an army of corpses continues to pursue me. I see them every time I close my eyes. The politicians, the nobles, the merchants, the rich and powerful. Just leave me alone. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. I frantically swing my sword at them. I cut and cut, bisecting them, slashing them apart, but they don't relent. Chunks of flesh and bone, viscera and intestines, lungs and brains, they gather in a writhing mass that come crashing down on me like a gory wave, threatening to swallow me whole. Get away, get away, get away, get away. I try to escape, but they corner me again and again. My victims staring at me with hollow eyes, accusing me. How could you do this to us? How? They throw themselves at me, their decaying fingers gripping my neck, trying to rip the life out of me, just as I did them. Let me go, let me go, let me go, let me go. I frantically thrash and struggle, but no matter what I do, I can't break away. The rotting blood and bile trickles down my body. dissolving my skin. The wave finally swallows me up. I just want a normal life. I just want my humanity back. I woke from my nightmare, my breath short and ragged. My entire body was soaked in a horrible sweat. I fought back the rising urge to vomit. The night after completing a mission was always like this. The only difference was seeing one more face in the crowd. Even after years, my disgust for murder had never abated. Not even in the slightest. No matter how much time had passed, I couldn't rid myself of the scars left in my mind by the terrible acts I performed. And yet, I had no choice but to continue. Nine and I were nothing but tools. Our individual thoughts and ideals had no meaning. They were completely unnecessary. All the organization required from us was a skillful capacity for murder and unquestioning subordination. To kill as we were ordered to. Our entire existence boiled down to a singular point. To reject an order or attempt escape was tantamount to suicide. The organization, to even speak its true name, was forbidden. Oh. It was a group of professional killers that existed in the shadows of society. Its core business was eliminating marks, but its true objective likely lay elsewhere. As a low-ranking member, I was simply one of the organization's weapons. There was no reason for such info to be shared with me. Most members of the organization had served it since they were children deemed to possess a special potential, where they made to undergo combat instruction and exercises in a place known as the factory. The majority of children who entered the factory would never again see beyond its walls. Unable to endure the merciless training they were put through, it would become their tomb. The lucky ones who did survive, however, were officially recognized as entry-level members of the organization. That's what happened to me. I was forced to abandon who I was when I first passed through the factory's doors at 7 years old. Anyone who dared to utter their former name would be subject to severe punishment. There was no concept of individuality. Life in the organization meant being nothing more than a tool in an arsenal. It wasn't until I graduated at the age of 10 that I was given a name. It only served to solidify my status as a weapon, however. Our names, more like titles, are based on tarot cards. In my case, the moniker I received was from the Minor Arcana, 3 of Swords. It didn't even have the slightest bit of humanity to it, but it was better than having no name at all. Both the higher-ups and a small fraction of the very best candidates were given a name based on the Major Arcana. Everyone who survived training and made it was skilled. But in terms of combat ability, the Major Arcana could run circles around the rest of us. Rumor had it they were even more powerful than top-rank bracers. I left my room and peeked into the neighboring one. It seemed like 9 was still sleeping. It was time for my report, so I headed out on my own. Low-level members of the organization generally operated in pairs. My partner is 9 of Swords, a girl 1 year my junior. 9 was a natural genius. She graduated from a factory in a single year, despite the fact that the average kid takes 3 to 5, if they even make it to graduation without dropping it out, that is. From gathering info to analyzing battle situations, acting abilities, to infiltration tactics, she was top class in a multitude of fronts. That's to say nothing of her combat style, which made use of needles and threads, allowing her to control the field of battle and dominate her foe. All in all, her abilities were far better suited to assassinations than mine were. It was a bit awkward for us when we were first paired up, but after working together for a year, I could honestly say she was the best partner I've ever had, and the most reliable. At the time, she was also the person I needed to regard with the most caution. The reasons why the organization used a partner system were twofold. The obvious reason was it helped facilitate missions, but it also forced each partner to monitor the other. In the organization, betrayal was swiftly returned with death. A tool was doomed to serve until it breaks. As such, we were expected to be part of the organization the entirety of our lives. As a general rule, we were afforded no freedom. There did, however, exist special rules. If one were to sense that their partner was scheming to betray the organization, they could sell them out and gain their own freedom. Ooh. All you had to do was make your report, prevent sufficient evidence of your suspicion, and then you were given the task of eliminating them yourself. If you succeeded, you were free. Simply running away meant resigning yourself to looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. The organization had eyes everywhere. Anyone who wanted true freedom was better off waiting for the chance to turn their partner in. There was another problem too. The worst of the worst would actually fabricate proof of their partner's betrayal in an effort to earn their own freedom. Thus, the person you needed to regard most cautiously was not an enemy you'd face on any mission, but the partner who was always at your side. You needed to entertain and accept the notion that you could be betrayed at any time. Members did not turn their backs on the organization. This was an absolute requirement for survival, and a lesson I learned very early on through personal experience. 3 years ago, I tried to escape. Well, I suppose it was more we than I. At the time, I was partnered with another boy, one known as Ace of Swords. Ace was a year my senior, and he was a pretty good guy. We got along well enough, and he quickly grew into an older brother figure for me. He wielded a giant sword with ease, one as long as he was tall. Oh, just taking a look at the photo quick. And he used it both to destroy our enemies and protect me. He really was an ace when it came to battle. In that sense, his name couldn't have been more appropriate. One thing Ace and I shared was contempt for the murders. We were forced to perform. Contempt for the murders we were forced to perform. I can't remember how the idea of escaping the organization came up initially, but I do recall that neither of us objected to it. As I mentioned, the system was set up to prevent individual members from betraying the organization, as they could be sold out by their partner. We figured the best way around that was to simply work together and escape the organization as a team. With our objective decided on, we began planning in earnest. We quickly decided we need to execute our plan as far away from the other pair of assassins employed by the organization. The first part of our plan went well enough. We entered Erebonia, thinking that it's a considerable distance from our normal area of operations meant that we could enjoy a certain degree of safety. That was a severe misjudgment on our part, though. The organization had eyes there as well. We were approached by other pairs of assassins twice, and both times ended in combat. We managed to fend them off, however. Ace and I were partners for a reason, and we fought well together. The third time, however, it was our overseer who paid us a visit. To say that his power was overwhelming wouldn't do it justice. It was like trying to fight a force of nature. We barely managed to escape with our lives, suffering heavy wounds in the process. With nowhere else to go, we huddled together in a cave, conscious of the fact that our next encounter with the overseer would surely be our last. There was nothing more to be said about the situation, and for what felt like an eternity, we passed the time in silence. "Hey, Ace," I began speaking, believing that it would be the last conversation we ever had. "What's up, buddy?" "I just want to say, all things considered, I think everything could have went a lot worse." "What's that supposed to mean?" He struggled through the pain to force out a little smirk at the comment. "Don't get me wrong, I have plenty of regrets, but still." Ace waited in silence for me to continue. "Being by your side all this time, well, it's made my life so much better, Ace. And even if we're fated to meet our deaths here, it's a million times better than spending our lifetime as just another tool." The fire flickered. Our shadows danced on the cave wall. Finally, Ace broke the silence, his voice a mere whisper. 3. Thanks for everything, man." "You too, Ace. Thank you." I had said what I needed to say. I felt that if our opponents were to arrive at that very moment, I'd at least be able to give him my whole soul to the battle. But then, if that's how you feel... Suddenly, the ambience in the cave completely shifted, like some horrible hallucination. Ace's icy voice pierced through me, chilling me to the bone. Then die, buddy. Die for me. My first reaction was slight confusion. I actually interpreted it as a clumsy way of saying that we would face our deaths together. I turned to face him, just to clarify, and what I saw next was Ace's massive sword speeding down toward my head. I immediately dodged his strike, and the ground where I had been laying only a moment ago had been shattered in rubble. Ace, what are you doing? I cried. You can't figure it out on your own? Have you forgotten the final rule for those who betray the organization? The final rule. I hadn't forgotten it. I simply hadn't given it much thought. It seemed irrelevant to our situation, but everything clicked into place then. When two partners betray the organization, the only way for one of them to gain its forgiveness was to kill their partner and present the organization with a corpse. The idea behind this rule was to force escapees into a sense of desperation, and then push them into killing each other, taking care of the problems so the organization didn't have to. To my absolute shock, this is precisely what Ace was trying to do. I understood what was happening, but all I could do was ask why, over and over. Ace, why? Why are you doing this? You know, buddy, becoming partners with you was the only bit of luck I had in my whole goddess-damned life. I really did want to be free together, to get our own humanity back. Then why are you... Because I need to survive, he said, his voice dripping with desperation. I can't die like this. Screaming wildly, Ace swung his sword at me again. The same sword that had been used to save my life more times than I can count was now being used in an attempt to end it. Just die, he screamed. I tried to scream back, but the horrible knot in my stomach and the storm of emotions in my heart ensured that the only thing that came out of my mouth was a meaningless warble as I met his sword with my own. Engulfed in despair, I surrendered control to my instincts and engaged this enemy in combat as I would any other. I don't clearly remember what happened from there. All I know is that I was overtaken by rage and sadness and became a slashing, screaming monster. I was finally brought to my senses by the sound of Ace's body collapsing to the ground. That's how I managed to survive. How I won back my position as one of the organization's tools. And that's where I'd been ever since. Our escape was a deadly failure that laid bare my inadequacies. I still hadn't given up on winning back my humanity, but I'd be damned if I was ever going to trust anyone else ever again. Oof. Chapter 5. The Overseer and the Report. The town was practically empty, and the first rays of dawn were only just beginning to pierce the dark sky above. Stepping out of the inn, three inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with a chilly air in an effort to dispel his drowsiness. The town, known as Luzent, was located on the border of Calvard and Remeferia. 3 and 9 would often undertake missions in both countries, making the centrally located town a perfect base of operations. East of the town was the official border crossing into Calvard. In stark contrast, westward lay a mountain road known to only a select few. It was a treacherous path, to be sure, but also one that facilitated entry into the Republic without needing to go through the official channels. 3 headed to the designated rendezvous point, a small hill surrounded by weathered boulders. The site was deep in the mountains, and therefore free of unwanted eyes. There, he found a black silhouette waiting for him. It was a man hidden in shadow, wrapped in a tattered black cloak that obscured his face and body both. Despite his bedraggled attire, his presence had an insurmountable weight to it, instilling a primal sort of fear into anyone who laid eyes on him. "I'm here to make my report," said 3. In response, the cloaked figure uttered only a single word: "Speak." This man, known as the Overseer, was one of the higher-ranking members of the organization. He was given the name of Emperor from the Major Arcana, but those who served under him were simply referred to him simply as Overseer. As his title suggested, he watched over 3 and the rest of the organization's tools. He was the one who provided mission instructions and received the reports. 3 relayed the details of the Haldor mission to the Overseer. As he finished, the man spoke again. Next. Right, regarding 9 of Swords. As part of their debriefing, every member was required to report on their partner's activities. Each of the pair would separately describe what they did and what they observed their partner doing. Even the slightest discrepancy between the pair's reports was regarded with suspicion. The objective behind this requirement was to instill them with fear that any plot they may hatch to betray the organization would swiftly make its way to the ears of their superiors. That is all, 3 said as he finished his report. Very well, the Overseer said. You will be contacted with instructions for your next mission once they're ready. Understood. 3 turned to head back to town, but as he did, the Overseer spoke again. It was little more than a whisper, but it was delivered with a weight that froze 3 in his tracks. Stop. 3 slowly turned around to face the Overseer. As always, his dark hood completely covered his face. It has been 3 years now. You've not been designing any more plans, have you? 3 felt a sudden chill shoot down his spine. The Overseer's suffocating gaze was laced with a powerful malice. There was no need for 3 to ask for clarification. He knew the Overseer was talking about his escape attempt 3 years prior. The Emperor had personally conducted many of the organization's purges of runaway members. As their very lives became threatened, many low-ranking members would find themselves overwhelmed by fear, rendering them powerless before the merciless Emperor. Thus, even within the organization, a cruel place in its own right, the Emperor earned himself a reputation for his savagery. He was also the very same man who had tracked down 3 and Ace during their escape attempt. Had he already picked up on 3's new plan to escape? No. 3 found the thought absurd. He had taken every step with the utmost care and prudence. Further, if the Emperor had obtained some proof of 3's wrongdoing, the young assassin would already be dead. This was a test. If 3 wavered here, even in the slightest, it would mean his end. I will never again attempt something so foolish. I am a tool of the organization, nothing more. My sole purpose is to take the lives of my targets. The way he casts his eyes, his calculated and practiced manner of speech, his natural breathing patterns. 3 had pulled it off to perfection. Silence hung heavy in the air between them for a moment. Finally, the Emperor spoke. I do hope that is the case. The murderous presence faded from the air, as did the tension that had been building in 3's chest. There are certain expectations riding on your shoulders, the Emperor said. I will fully devote myself to them, 3 said. In the same practiced tone, he moved once more to return to town and was not stopped this time. He bought it. Back at his inn room, 3 let out a sigh of relief as he collapsed into his bed. Nothing had really happened during his exchange with the Overseer, but nonetheless, he felt completely drained. Without exception, each interaction he had with the Overseer was psychologically exhausting. This was to be expected, however, as he was indeed hiding his true intentions from the organization. In truth, 3 had been planning his second escape attempt. The past 3 years had been grueling, but it did nothing to quash his fervent desire for freedom. If anything, his resolve to reclaim his humanity had only grown stronger by the day. However, each day also saw his blood-drenched hands growing yet heavier with sin. He was a mere tool, human in form only. What few shreds of humanity still remained in his heart, he feared would be forever lost before much longer. Each new day that dawned could be the day he finally slipped away into being a little more than a device, one whose only function was assassination. Put simply, a cold-hearted monster. That was the terrifying future he dreaded above all else. I absolutely need to succeed this time. I need to get out. His plan had 2 requirements he absolutely needed to meet in order to succeed. First off, he needed to avoid a direct confrontation with the Overseer. Second, Nine could not find out about his plan, regardless of their partnership. He had to be careful to avoid even giving the impression that he longed for freedom. Of course, this meant that 3 would be forced to abandon 9, someone who had fought at his side through countless life or death situations. The girl was even younger than he was, but for all her genius, there seemed to be something off about her. Nonetheless, whenever 3 thought about the moment he would pull the trigger and finally put his plan into motion, he always felt a strange sensation welling up inside of him. Strangely enough, it was a desperate urge to fill her in. There were a number of times where 3 had tried, actually. Before he could even get the first word out, however, memories of Ace's sword speeding down towards him would flash through his mind. In the end, he always remained silent. I can't take this anymore. I can't let my scars define me. I know what I have to do. There's no other way. 3 shook off the thoughts plaguing him and returned his focus to preparing for his escape. The only person I can trust is myself. The rest of the day went by quickly, and before long, dusk began to settle on the town. The day saw 3's diligence pay off at last. His final preparations had gone as smoothly as he could have hoped for. The time had finally arrived. He would set his plan into motion that night. Once 9 fell asleep, he would leave town via the mountain road. Once in Calvard, he'd be traveling by car, and he had already arranged for a rental to take him up north to a certain city. Once he arrived, he'd promptly set off for Liberl via one of the international airship routes that regularly depart from the city. He had yet to decide what to do after that point. He could stay a night or 2 in Liberl, or perhaps head over to Le Mans. In any case, he needed to get as far away from his current location as possible. He may have been in the lowest rung of the organization and had little idea what went on among the upper echelons, but he was determined to show them all that he was capable of casting off the shackles that they had bound him with. Caw? Oh, it's a crow. His rising determination was interrupted by a crow flying into the room. He made a few circles in the air before landing on the table. What the... Taking a closer look at the bird, 3 noticed a specific crest adorning one of its legs. As he did, his face twisted into a grimace. It could only mean one thing. This was the method the Overseer used to communicate. Now? He wants to meet now? It hadn't even been an entire day since 3 had delivered his report. The briefing for the next mission, maybe? Even as he said the words, he was gripped by an indescribable sense of dread and anxiety. However much he wanted to simply ignore the summons, it was not a luxury he could afford. The only chance his plan had of succeeding was if he was able to put in a good amount of distance between himself and his would-be pursuers before the Overseer realized what happened. Were 3 to ignore a direct order, however, the organization would immediately recognize it as an act of rebellion, one that would inevitably lead to his death. Mentally preparing himself for another encounter, one he could not avoid, 3 set out for the meeting location. The rendezvous point was the foot of a small hill deep within the mountains. The same site he had been just that morning, in fact. There remained no trace of the ominous, eerie stillness that pervaded the place before, however. Bathed by the light of a setting sun, the weathered boulders seemed wreathed in brilliant flames from a distance. 3 arrived to find 2 figures already waiting for him. The first was the Overseer, draped in the same tattered robe as usual. A thought occurred to 3 that it made the man look more the part of a hermit arcana than the Emperor. At the man's side stood a young girl carrying a large stuffed bear, 9. Her attire was more or less the same as what she wore on the Haldor mission, with a few alterations to make it more functional and mobile. Her presence there did not cause any alarm for 3. After all, if they had been called to be briefed for their next mission, it was only natural she would be summoned as well. Something felt different, however. 3 couldn't put his finger on why, but anxiety began gripping his chest. "So, you've arrived," the overseer said as 3 approached. Yes, what is my task?" The initial exchange was the same as it always was. What happened afterward, however, was decidedly not. "Make your appeal." "My appeal?" 3 said slowly, the anxiety in his chest rising. "I've received a report detailing your treachery from 9 of Swords." I don't... He was at an utter loss for words. He had calculated each and every outcome that could potentially happen, going over the steps in his head time and again. And the absolute worst one was now playing out right before his eyes. A wave of despair washed over him. Could this really be happening? Had 9 betrayed him, just like Ace? It wasn't possible, 3 thought. He hadn't told her a thing. He knew that their relationship was strictly professional, and he could not, under any circumstances, trust her. That was just how the partnerships in the organization worked. How could she have known? It didn't make any sense. There's been some kind of mistake. He attempted to defend himself, knowing full well it was a futile endeavor. "You can't talk yourself out of this, S. No, 3 of Swords." 9 finally spoke, but her usual sleepy demeanor was nowhere to be found. Instead, her voice was crisp, her eyes alert. She removed a scrap of paper from within the bear and showed it to 3. "This is your ticket for the airship voyage to Liberl, the one you booked for noon tomorrow." 3 fell to the ground. Felt the ground fall out from under him. Amidst his shock, a small part of him wanted to yell out that the ticket was fake, that he had the real ticket. But to do so would be tantamount to suicide. 9 continued speaking as though directly responsible for 3's unspoken questions. "The ticket you have in your possession is counterfeit. I swapped it for the genuine one while you weren't paying attention." Fresh from completing a mission that utilized this very same kind of forgery, 3 now found himself the victim of the exact same trick. "By the way, the name you used to acquire this ticket is Ryan's Fogart? Student of Genis Royal Academy, correct?" 9 continued. "That's the same name you used for your false ID on one of our missions last year. That would mean you've been planning this for quite some time, wouldn't it?" Despite the immediate threat to his life, 3 couldn't help but admire 9's genius, strangely enough. 3 decided he wouldn't even try to come up with an excuse. 9 had clearly seen right through his plan. She'd seen right into his mind, really. There was just one part that he didn't understand. Even if it was her duty to sell him out like this, even if she was a genius. He had been so cautious and prudent in every step of his plan, yet it had all been laid bare, seemingly without a trace of effort. How the hell did this happen? I take it that expression to mean you're trying to puzzle out just how your entire plan was exposed, 9 said, a slight smile playing at the corner of her lips. It was clear to 3. She was toying with him now, mocking him. "You do realize I've been watching you the whole time we've been partners, right? You've been my only target right from day one." Oof. Her tone was merciless, her words dripping with thinly veiled venom. "Yes, I've been watching you 3, inspecting, observing. The only real challenge was remaining patient as I waited for you to slip up and finally show your true colors. It's been that way since the moment I became your partner." 3 struggled to wrap his mind around what 9 was saying. The fact is, you did attempt to betray the organization, but even if you hadn't, I would have falsified whatever I needed in order to ensure your demise." She continued to speak, leaving nothing unsaid despite the overseer's presence. With each word, 3 felt more and more baffled. He couldn't understand her observing him to the degree that their job required. But where was this malicious hatred of hers coming from? She felt this way from the start? Why? The overseer, who had been silent for some time, let out a low, derisive laugh. "I take it to mean you haven't figured it out. Who she is, I mean." 3 could not, for the life of him, figure out what that was supposed to mean. He looked over at 9, searching for some sort of clue. All he was met with, however, was a glare of pure hatred, one that made him shudder in fear. He had never seen her look that way before. "Do you remember Ace of Swords, your former partner?" she began, before her voice gained a measured, deadly weight to it. "The one you murdered. He was my brother." Uh-oh. 3's world began spinning. He started to feel violently ill. His senses dulled, his mind went blank. It became harder to breathe, as though he were being pulled to the bottom of the sea. The air crushed out of his lungs by its unrelenting pressure. Now, after all this time, I can finally avenge his murder. 3 barely heard 9's words, as his head swam with thoughts. Ace was 9's brother? She had known everything from the start? She'd been biding her time, hiding her true intentions from the moment they'd first met. Always keeping a watchful eye for a suitable opportunity to arise. An opportunity to claim her vengeance. 3 stood there dumbfounded, as though he had lost the ability to speak entirely. "I see no need for you to sputter through an excuse," the overseer said, reading the shock clearly written on across 3's face. "We have all the facts we need. You will be purged from the organization. As per our rules, your partner, 9 of Swords, will now end your life." Hearing the overseer's words, 9 stepped forward. "If you wish for assistance in this task," he said, turning to her, "you will not be penalized. The reward will remain the same. The only condition is that you must be the one to deliver the final blow. Once you have eliminated him, your obligations will be cleared. Though I admit, the idea of losing such talent pains me. The reward: the right to one's freedom, gained by uncovering and then executing a partner who had betrayed the organization. The yearning for this freedom had dominated 3's existence for years, and now 9 would be the one to gain it, in exchange for his life. Allow me the honor of doing it alone," she responded. "I will avenge my brother's death with my own hands." She took another step forward, producing a number of poisoned needles from inside the bear. Without a moment's hesitation, she launched them at 3. He instinctively drew his sword and batted the needles out of the air. The combat tactics that had been drilled into him dictated he close the distance between them, yet he didn't take so much as a single step. His parry was purely reflexive, programmed into his mind through years of combat. He had no intention of truly fighting back. Perhaps it was partially because he didn't want to hurt her. More than anything, however, it was because he knew there was no point in resisting. Even if he did manage to best 9, he would need to take on the Emperor afterward, and he knew that was a battle he had no chance of winning. 3 simply accepted his fate, was to die there and then. And there was nothing he could do to change it. 9 pulled out roughly twice as many needles as before, then again launched them at her former partner. In response, he automatically drew his short sword, and used both blades to swiftly deflect them. In 3's mind, the thought slowly began to sink in. This was his retribution for killing Ace. 9 leapt at him, closing the distance, and began attacking with an even greater intensity. Someone like me, 3 thought. Someone who slaughters a friend to preserve his own life doesn't deserve freedom. Someone like me doesn't deserve to live. 9 continued her assault, attacking with both her needles and her thread. Were this an ordinary situation, there was no chance she could be a match for 3 in close quarters. However, his heart was not in the battle, causing a significant shift in the balance of power in the fight. Eventually, 9 managed to decisively gain the upper hand, successfully looping her thread around 3's neck. "I'll die for vengeance," he thought. "Maybe that's the only outcome that makes sense. Maybe that's the end I deserve." Ooh, that's a good picture. 9 deftly moved her fingers, and the steel collar tightened around 3's neck. "This is the end," she said in a flat, rigid tone. 3 knew what would happen next. He closed his eyes, choosing to wait await his end in silence. But the cold embrace of death did not come. Chapter 6, Nine of Swords backstory? My mother died as soon as I was born. From that point, it was just me, my older brother, and our dad. As far back as I can remember, my dad was a monster. He took the mirror Mom left us and used it entirely for himself, spending each day drinking it away. He made no effort to put it to good use, to do anything that might help our family. And when he was in a bad mood, what little safe haven we had was violently wrested away. My brother acted like a parent to me more than Dad ever did. Whether at home or out there somewhere else, he always protected me. I really hated that house, but I always felt like it was bearable when he was there by my side. Those days didn't last for long, however. I was still quite young when the household ran out of money and Dad decided to put us to work. There weren't many options for a child to earn much mira, though, and even between my brother and I, our income barely made a scratch in the mounting debt. One day, my brother vanished, and Dad announced he had let him spread his wings. In other words, he had abandoned him. It was at that point that I stopped thinking of that monster as my family. Even in such an awful situation, I still held on to the idea that my brother would come back to me one day. That meant my only option was to stay here until he did. 3 long years later, I finally received a letter from him. He wrote that he was in a miserable place, but that he was managing to stay alive. I was able to send him a reply via the same method, thrilled to have a connection with him once again. I eventually found out that he was being forced to work as a killer for a shadowy society called The Organization. The things he said he had to do were awful, inhuman. Just from reading his words, I could feel his pain as though it were my own. He said the organization was nightmarishly strict, and that it was only thanks to his partner that he was able to send me letters in the first place. My brother wrote a lot about his partner, describing him as a true friend, almost like a younger brother. This was the only topic where I saw his writing soften, where he seemed happy. Naturally, I found myself wanting to meet this person, but that was impossible, and I knew it. I couldn't even meet my own sibling, let alone his partner in some secret assassin cabal. We continued exchanging letters like this for some time, but even that came to an end. The household ran out of mira, again, and I knew what was coming. I could tell it would soon be my turn to leave. I wrote my brother, telling him as much. He wrote back, telling me that he and his partner had decided to escape the organization. I could sense from his words just how resolved he was to do it. He followed his declaration with a promise to come for me, to get me out of that hellhole of a home. What followed, however, at the very end of his letter was a grim note. If this escape somehow ends in failure, I'm going to prioritize my partner's life over my own? That didn't happen. If it comes down to it, I'll sacrifice everything to make sure he gets out. At least he gets out of here. You can trust him. If anything happens, you can rely on him. That was the last letter I ever received from him. In the end, he never came back for me, and our dad kicked me out, just as I thought he would. He had become a slovenly mess. From the looks of it, he had gotten himself addicted to some especially nasty substances, the kind that tend to quickly drain one's finances. I knew they were destroying him physically as well, but I stopped caring long ago. I was done with that disgusting scumbag I once called a dad. I used an intermediary to secure an opportunity to join the organization. It was right as I was entering training that I learned of my brother's death. I was told he was killed by his own partner. It was then that my world began to fall apart. I threw myself headlong into my training, not thinking of anything else. I was distraught and trying to escape reality however I could. I ignored everyone around me, and even myself. I let my soul slip into hibernation and fully assumed the role of one of the organization's tools. During the day, I would follow orders, not thinking for myself. But then night would come, and have nothing to distract me. My mind would be tormented by thoughts of my brother's passing. The realization that I was now truly alone in this world shook me, as did the notion that my hands would soon be irreversibly stained with blood. Once the fear set in, there was no escaping it, and I gradually lost the ability to sleep properly. The body does have a limit, of course, and I'd eventually fall unconscious for about an hour a night. 2, if I was really lucky. But it wasn't sleep. Not really. It was far too shallow for me to physically or mentally recover much, and what little rest I did get was plagued with nightmares. Even after I had woken up, those bizarre, horrid sensations remained. A year passed like this, with no improvement whatsoever. Despite that, I was able to graduate from the factory at an exceptionally fast pace. That was when I finally had a chance to meet him, the boy who had fought alongside my brother as his partner. He had just finished his own re-education, a consequence of betraying the organization. As fate would have it, we were assigned as partners. He was the one who had stolen my brother from me, so I was resolved to despise him from the moment we met. I quietly kept a close eye on him, observing each and every one of his movements. Before long, though, something unexpected happened. Perhaps all my pent-up fear and exhaustion had finally boiled over. And perhaps it was just my instincts telling me the truth I'd been ignoring. Whatever the reason, one day we were out on a mission and I found myself able to sleep when I was next to him. I mean actually sleep, deeply and soundly for the first time in a year. There was something about his presence that gave me a sense of security. It wasn't unlike how I remembered feeling being next to my brother, strangely enough. When I woke up from this much-needed rest, so many things came rushing back. Suddenly, without warning, I found myself bawling, and as those tears came pouring out, the chains that had sealed my heart away slowly began to loosen. I started feeling human again. I could feel my emotions for the first time in what felt like an eternity. As soon as he saw me crying, the boy quickly came over to console me, but that just made me sob harder. I quickly discovered my new partner really was the person my brother wrote so fondly about. Blunt and a little awkward, but overall, a deeply kind person and a very thoughtful partner. Despite being shackled to the organization and forced to kill for years, he had yet to fully surrender his humanity. He did seem to be bearing a great sorrow, one far more intense than anything my brother had described. I could tell he wasn't the kind of person capable of betraying and murdering a friend to ensure his own survival. Given my brother's letter, it wasn't hard to work out what really happened. After making their escape, the two were backed into a corner, and their prospects were grim. Rather than both of them be killed, it was better that at least one of them survived. The only way for that to happen was for one to kill the other, to gain forgiveness in the eyes of the organization. My brother knew his partner would reject the idea outright, and that even if he did accept, he would insist on playing the part of the sacrifice. I was absolutely sure of that much. That's why my brother ended up feigning betrayal in order to get his partner to fight back and ultimately kill him. It was a plan that would spare his partner's life, but also deeply scar him in only the way an unexpected betrayal could. From that point on, being near him was the only way I was able to feel secure enough to sleep. And sleep I did, every chance I got. Midday, during our missions, if there was even the slightest opportunity, I was out like a light. After all, I needed to catch up on years of rest I had been robbed of. It was a truly surprising turn of events for me, to say the least. I soon learned the boy was tormented by the constant nightmares. I imagine the incident with my brother played a big role. There were so many moments where I saw how he was suffering and wanted to tell him the truth. But I would always stop myself at the last second, telling myself the time isn't right. Our missions occasionally called for performances of a sort to deceive onlookers. He was always pretty terrible at that. It was hard to decide why exactly that was, though. His movements were fine enough, as were his facial expressions. The factory emphasized all those things in its teachings, so he had received ample instruction there. It was just that he always seemed to overdo things, or drastically underdo them. I wondered if it may have something to do with the unshakable seriousness he always seems to have about him. It could be a real problem sometimes, but even to the point where he would become a liability, more of a liability than an asset. Any onlookers with half a brain would be able to tell something was less than genuine about his performances. I came to the conclusion he was just naturally bad at deceiving others. That's why I had to keep my plans from him, to prevent his terrible poker face from giving us away. He'd been earnestly working on his escape for a very long time. I, of course, understood the immense difficulty of his task, and why he had to keep it to himself. Still, it made me a bit sad he never spoke to me about it. He was in a precarious position, given that the organization still had doubts about him. I wasn't about to do anything to put him at risk, of course, but his shaky acting alone could very well have led to the organization seeing through this carefully laid scheme. If that happened, it would be the end of him, no question about it. The situation hadn't quite reached that point yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it did. After the Haldor Barn mission had wrapped up, I went to make my report. The man I reported to had an aura unlike anything I'd ever felt. He was the evil monster who managed the two of us. The organization's overseer, the Emperor. He was the one forcing us to kill. His face was always obscured by a robe, but it failed to mask the malice that overflowed from him. That day, he had a quiet, deadly exuberance about him, like a hawk that had locked onto its prey. There was no mistaking it. I knew he had caught on to my partner. He knew he had intended to betray the organization again. I knew he would gleefully purge him when the time came, and that time was getting closer with each passing day. If that's how things were going to be, I told myself, I would just have to get ahead of him and put my own plan into motion. The Emperor's intentions were obvious. Aware of the cruel history my partner and I shared, he made us partners in a bid to slowly push me toward revenge. He knew I'd eventually break and sell my partner out, forcing him to go through another bitter betrayal. The Emperor was looking forward to watching it all unfold. We were both tools of the organization and the personal playthings of the Emperors. So I decided to give him exactly what he wanted. Once I'd finished my mission report, I told the Emperor of my partner's intent to betray the organization. I then shared my plan to lure him to a specific place where I would eliminate him. I gave him a detailed explanation, making it as enticing as possible for the Emperor. It was easy enough to gain his consent, even with his face hidden under his cowl. He could hardly contain the excitement in his voice over the coming slaughter. The laugh that escaped his throat was a sound so vile, it still haunts me to this day. Later that evening, my partner arrived at the designated location, the base of the hill deep in the mountains. At first, he was horribly shaken by the realization he'd been betraying the organization. When he learned who my brother was, though, his face changed. I watched his surprise turn into despair, which in turn shifted to absolute acceptance of his fate. To call what I saw heart-wrenching didn't do it justice. I focused on my efforts on giving him the most vicious glare possible, one equal parts mocking and murderous. I came up with the foulest, most malicious things I could bear to say, trying to cut him to his very core. After all, the Emperor was standing right next to me, and if I was to be convincing, I couldn't afford even the slightest hesitation. I stepped forward. I was going to eliminate him. I shifted closer to my partner in order to facilitate my threat attack, or so I made it appear. My true objective was to put some distance between myself and the Emperor. Once I had my thread around his neck, the battle was as good as over. From there, I knew I could end his life with the flick of a finger. This is the end. I meant those words from the bottom of my heart. A transparent cord ran through the center of the web of thread under my control. Manipulating this cord allowed me to set off a chain reaction that twisted it into a complex spiral shape that I would often use to trap distant foes during missions. Fully focused on watching his toys in the throes of bloodthirsty vengeance, it was the Emperor who would relax his guard the most. Right at the climax of our battle, I seized the opportunity, and with perfect timing, I was able to ensnare the unwitting Emperor, leaving him shackled and immobile. The key was the transparent cord. It may not have had the same cutting power as steel thread, but it was more than twice as strong. Even so, I couldn't count on it to hold the Emperor for long. Without a moment's delay, I summoned all my strength to pull on the cord. A low rumble sounded out, and a section of the rocky hill collapsed, dropping a torrent of rubble below. I had taken my time to find the perfect location, one with brittle bedrock that I could break away on cue. The stones roared and tumbled in a huge wave, hurtling down towards the Emperor. In the middle of it all was a giant boulder, more than 10 ards across. Time seemed to slow, as it fell directly down on the Emperor's head. Oh! The thunder of the rocks slide, drowning out all other sounds. Finally, it all came crashing down. The aftermath looked as though a catastrophic earthquake had just taken place. The Emperor had taken a direct hit from a massive boulder. There's no way he could have survived that. Even if he somehow had, he was now buried alive. My partner looked on in confusion, still processing what had happened. "S," I cried out, finally able to use the name I preferred to call him by. I ran over to him and buried my head into his chest. This was where I felt most safe, by his side. I nuzzled up against him, holding him tight, never wanting to let him go. I never hugged him before then. I had always been too afraid to do so. "I'm so sorry I said those horrible things," I sobbed. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth." There was so much more to explain, but those were the things I wanted to say the most. Even though he was still reeling from everything that had just happened, he was still kind enough to hold me close and try to calm me down. "Nine, what in the world?" Before he could finish the sentence, something I never predicted happened. A small amount of fallen rocks and boulders shifted slightly. Pebbles began to rise up into the air. It was slow, but unmistakable. "What's happening?" Dumbfounded, all we could do was look on in confusion. "Is it some kind of space element art?" "No, there's no way," I mused aloud. No, that didn't seem right. Perhaps it was some kind of device that functioned the same way as the airship's anti-gravity components? I didn't understand what was happening. I just sat there staring blankly, my mind racing for an explanation. Before I could reach one, however, my partner spoke, his voice steeped in panic. "That's the Emperor's power." But that would mean... It meant the Emperor was still alive. More and more rocks began floating upward, taking their place among the ever-increasing collection gently balanced in the air. "Nine, we need to move." I continued to sit there, absolutely at a loss on what to think. Three grabbed my hand and we set off at a sprint. We were able to cover a good amount of distance before we heard what sounded like a massive explosion behind us. We turned to see the boulders and rocks of all sizes being flung upward into the sky, like a volcano erupting before our eyes. Chapter 7. Tears and Promises. 3 and 9 ducked into a mountain cave on the outskirts of Luzent. They had fled from the Emperor as fast as their legs could carry them, and were now completely out of breath. As they sat there together, 9 told 3 everything she had kept from him up till then. She told him about Ace, her brother, about herself, about the details of her plan, and finally, what Ace's true intentions were on that night 3 years ago. At the start, 3 occasionally chimed in and asked questions, but as the conversation went on, he fell silent. By the end, his head was hung so low that 9 couldn't see his expression. He'd been utterly convinced that his friend, his one true friend, had betrayed him, when in reality, Ace had sacrificed his life to ensure 3 would survive. And as thanks for that incredibly selfless act, 3 had not only killed him, but had spent the past 3 years despising his memory. Then came his sister, risking her life to save her brother's killer. 3 felt his chest tighten up as a wild mix of emotions ran through his head, threatening to overpower him. He was grateful for being fortunate enough to have 2 people in his life, Ace and 9, who he could fully trust. It's a long reading. At the same time, he felt a bottomless well of anger burst up. Anger at himself, the pathetic excuse for a human being that he was. Battered by his storm of emotions, his breathing became increasingly ragged. S, are you crying? Nine looked on in concern. Having finished her story, she didn't need a response, however. Three's pained silence spoke volumes. I'm fine, he said, returning to his usual blunt tone. Is there anything I can do to make you feel better? Nine asked. I said I'm fine. Despite his words, Three's head still hung low. You're an awful actor, but you're an even worse liar when you're not performing, you know that? Three sunk down to his knees. Nine moved over to him, taking his head in her hands. She began gently ruffling his hair, like a mother comforting a child. Everything's okay now, she murmured gently. It's all okay, but Three stammered, his voice growing weak and hoarse. The last bits of Three's facade broke down, overwhelmed by Nine's kindness, and he relented at last. Nine was younger than Three, and definitely looked the part. But in that moment, the picture? In that moment, she showed an almost motherly level of understanding and compassion. For someone like Three, who grew up without that warmth, it was his first time being comforted by someone, his first time feeling the warmth of family. I know how strong you've had to be, S. I know how hard it's been, but for so long, but it's okay now, I promise. No longer able to hold his emotions back, he finally broke down. A lifetime's worth of tears came flooding out of his eyes all at once. I'm such a wretched excuse for it, he sobbed, no longer able to control his voice in the slightest. Hot tears poured down his cheeks, staining the cool floor of the cave. That's not true. You know that it's not. Nine said softly, continuing to run her fingers through his hair. Why am I still alive? Why isn't Ace here instead? He weakly slammed his fist against the ground in frustration. Not another word of that. I won't hear it. You're the one who's been there for me for the past few years. You, S. But it's because of me that Ace... Listen, that just means you need to fight twice as hard. You're living for him now, too. Three's words failed him as he was overtaken by sobbing, his years of pain and suffering pouring out of him. After some time, Three was able to calm himself down somewhat and regain his composure. I'm here for you, so don't cry, Nine told him. But if you ever want to, then that's okay too. So, which is it then? Three retorted, his detached demeanor creeping back. He suddenly became aware of the fact that he was in her arms and hurriedly pulled away, immediately shifting the conversation back towards exchanging information in an attempt to mask his sudden embarrassment. They finished catching up and turned their attention to the current predicament. So, the overseer had figured me out. He knew I was going to try to make a run for it. And that's why you moved to strike first, in order to outmaneuver him. Three thought out loud. That's right, I've been watching the whole time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to take him down. Wish you'd told me beforehand. And let you spoil the element of surprise with your awful acting skills? Nine gave a wry grin. Yeah, I don't think so. Three's face scrunched up a bit. Both Nine and the Emperor had caught on to his plan, so there was a little room for him to defend himself in that regard. I chose the moment he'd be most distracted, Nine continued, switching to a serious expression. My timing was perfect, and my preparations were more than enough, but despite all that, despite everything, despite being buried under a pile of massive boulders, the Emperor was still very much alive. No matter how much she thought, Nine simply couldn't figure out how it was possible. It's likely his power at work, Three said. He had said the same thing earlier, right as they took off running. What exactly is his power? Nine asked. I'm fairly certain he can control gravity somehow. Three said. He did something similar when Ace and I fought him 3 years ago. Three wrenched open a bitter, painful memory and began relaying what he remembered to Nine. He and Ace had been able to fend off the first 2 pairs of assailants. sent after them by the organization, but then they had come to face the Emperor. Even with the element of surprise on their side, even when they coordinated their attacks perfectly, facing him proved exceptionally difficult. They found their bodies both heavy and clumsy, and their movements lacked precision and skill. The Emperor, on the other hand, was nimble, as could be, almost inhumanly so, and the two were quickly overpowered. So, what do you think? 3 looked at 9, awaiting her input. There was no sign of him starting any cast or charge up, so I doubt he's using arts, she said, her brow furrowed in thought. As for a portable gravity manipulation device small enough for a single person to carry and conceal, well, given modern technology, it's seriously hard to imagine. He might have an artifact or something like that. An avalanche couldn't kill him, and he has enough precise control to be able to move individual stones and boulders. Artifact. 9 scratched her head in frustration. This sucks. We really don't have a lot to go on here. She paused, thinking a moment more, and then continued. In any case, unless something major changes, he's too powerful for us. Any attempt at a direct attack is going to result in our deaths. They fell silent for a time, until 3 spoke up, a grave expression on her face. If the time comes when we have to choose, we're going to have to prioritize your life, 9. You need to be the one to Stop it. 9 silenced 3, with an outburst of pure emotion, far more raw than her usual self. But then you'd be able to. If you die, I'm going right after you, she shouted. I'll do it myself if I have to. The calm motherly figure from before was nowhere to be seen. 9 was in a frenzy now, almost like a child throwing a tantrum. Regardless of her tone, however, her words were heartfelt and earnest. I can't go back to being not able to sleep, her voice dropped in a whisper. I can't go back to being alone. The weight of her feelings was clear to 3. Seeing this, he let out a short sigh. Then you have my word. No matter what it takes, I'll protect you. That's not what I'm asking for. Okay, you're right, 3 said, taking a deep breath. Then I promise that we'll survive this. We'll get through it together. 9 looked at 3 with imploring, almost pleading eyes. You swear? I swear, he said. Now, if we're going to have any chance at all, we'll need to do everything perfectly. The rock slide was massive enough that despite the fact that he survived, it was hard to imagine the Emperor was completely unscathed. If they tried to flee now, the organization would quickly find them again, and they would have to contend with the Emperor at his full strength. The pair knew if they were going to make a move, now is the time. Let's do it then. We'll take him out. Ooh. Chapter 8, Gravity and Artifacts. 3 and 9 returned to the hill, or more accurately, where the hill used to be. It was now completely unrecognizable. A sizable chunk of it was gone. It had been strewn about the area, having been strewn about the area in the form of countless bits of rubble. The Emperor stood right where they had left him, seemingly unfazed. As 3 and 9 had surmised, he had sustained at least some manner of injury. Nothing major, but his ever-present robe, under which he had hidden his face, had been reduced a little more than a shredded cape. Underneath, he wore a golden helmet bearing a crown design. In his hands, he carried a golden scepter with a spherical... Just looking at his... Kind of looks familiar. That outfit looks familiar. Golden scepter with a spherical tip, and his body was covered in golden armor. The word ostentatious was insufficient to describe his heavily gilded countenance. Everything about him suggested both needless grandeur and wicked condescension. I knew you would return. You two aren't complete fools after all. The Emperor called out to them. 3 and 9 remained silent as they approached slowly. So, have you decided? Which of you two will gain the organization's forgiveness? 3 and 9 turned to each other and nodded. And 3 removed his hand from his sword, leaving it unsheathed. 3 knelt down and closed his eyes, showing acceptance of what was to come. In response, Nine pulled out some of her poisoned needles and silently launched them at Three's neck, or at least that's how she made it appear. At the last second, before the needles parted from her fingers, she deftly altered the trajectory, sending them speeding towards the Emperor. The envenomed projectiles whizzed perfectly through the air as ever. However, as they neared their intended target, they suddenly curved downward, sharply, plummeting harmlessly to the ground. "Very well. I hear your answer loud and clear," the Emperor proclaimed, looking up at the pair. "You both wish to die today." "Not a chance," Nine called out, throwing another volley of needles directly at the Emperor. Their trajectory suddenly shifted again, this time upward. From his kneeling position, Three quickly shifted his stance and pushed forward off the ground with all the power he could muster in his legs. He launched himself at the Emperor, breaking into a full-on charge. "We've had enough. You're the one meeting death today." Three began slashing away at his target with incredible speed. His lightning-quick strikes grew slow and sluggish as soon as they neared the Emperor, however. With his assailant's speed so drastically curbed, the man was able to use his golden scepter to effortlessly bat aside the boy's assault. In the same instant, Nine's second set of needles changed direction mid-air and began falling straight toward the Emperor. She had managed to calculate the range of his gravitational field with just a single throw. Once she understood the effects on projectiles, she was able to revise her trajectory. Moreover, she had factored in the increased acceleration from the higher gravity, meaning her needles would hit harder than normal. Despite all that, however, her attacks was neutralized by the flick of his gilded arm. It was still not enough to penetrate his armor. It was, however, more than sufficient to arouse his ire. "You dare defy me! Me!" Livid, he swung his scepter downward. The three immediately reacted, just barely managing to block the attack with the sword. Even so, the impact alone threw him back several arcs. Three could feel his brain rattle in his skull from the force of the blow. There was no way the Emperor's physical strength and the weight of the scepter alone could do that. It occurred to Three that there must have been another way he was able to manipulate gravity. "You will be purged," he said in a low growl. The same words Three had heard him say a few hours ago, and 3 years ago. When the Emperor spoke like this, it was nothing less than the arbitration of a death sentence. At the sound of those words, past memories bubbled up in Three's mind, and an old terror began to grip him. His legs grew wobbly, and he started to stagger. One glance back at Nine was all it took for him to restore his resolve. He forced himself back on his feet, reflexively snapping into a fighting stance, and Nine continued to provide covering fire with their needles as he resumed his assault. Their approach proved no more fruitful than before. Even so, as Three continued to fight under such grueling conditions, he slowly became more capable. His understanding of his foe's gravitational trickery improved, and his strikes grew more swift and precise as a result. The way his muscles intuitively reacted, the angle and speed at which he swung his sword, he was slowly chipping away at the Emperor's overwhelming advantage. Though Three may not have enjoyed the same powers of insight his partner possessed, his skills in close-quarter combat were elite, by even the most exacting of standards. For her part, Nine's cover was solid and unwavering. Realizing her needles had no hope of piercing the Emperor's gold plating, she had instead begun aiming for gaps between its pieces. It was an incredibly difficult task, but as she grew more accustomed to the disrupting effects of the gravitational field, she was gradually getting closer. She began weaving in offensive arts along with her volley of needles in order to keep the Emperor on his toes. Her attacks appeared simple enough for her foe to deal with, but they still managed to pull his attention away from Three, if even for a moment. The fight raged on, and after a bit of time, 3 and 9 appeared to have finally begun gaining the upper hand, yet the Emperor did not seem fazed in the slightest. His expression was unreadable beneath the shadows of his helmet, but it was clear from his body language he still believed himself fully in control of the situation. 3 managed to land the occasional strike, but even his sword seemed to do little against the Emperor's impossibly resilient armor. In an attempt to land a heavier blow, 3 launched himself into the air, intending to let gravity carry his sword downward as 9's needles had. However, he found himself soaring up far higher than he intended, impossibly so, as though he had suddenly sprouted wings. His mark completely missed, he lost his sense of balance and began tumbling through the air. He quickly realized that it could only have been due to more of his foe's trickery. Reduced gravity? Expertly seizing the opening, the Emperor raised his scepter overhead, then swiftly swung it downward, as if mimicking this motion. 3 suddenly dropped out of the air, thrown to the ground below like a rag doll. Gah! The air knocked out of his lungs. 3 struggled to catch his breath, spitting up mouthfuls of blood in between gasps. Get out of the way, he's not done. Saved by 9's frantic warning, 3 just barely managed to roll out of the way. A split second later, the scepter slammed down into the ground where he'd just been. As the gravity-enhanced scepter connected with the rocky ground below, let out a powerful blast, leaving a crater in its wake. The resulting shockwave launched 3 to the side, knocking him to relative safety. He had taken a direct hit. Had he taken a direct hit, he would have been completely pulverized. Though dazed, he was still aware enough to signal to 9 that he was okay. He forced himself to his feet. The battle had completely changed. The Emperor had begun manipulating gravity levels on a constant cycle, and 3 was forced into a defensive position. Whenever he managed to get a handle on his foe's barrage of attacks, he found the gravity level altered yet again, forcing him to start back at 0. It was impossible for him to fight in such ever-changing conditions. The situation was taxing for 9 as well. She found herself forced to constantly recalculate the field's range and gravity values, severely reducing the number of effective attacks she was able to launch. Despite their bleak outlook, the 2 of them continued to hold out. Even when pressured, 3 served as an excellent vanguard, consistently denying the Emperor any opportunity for a decisive strike. 9, meanwhile, continued to back him up flawlessly, acting with a surgical precision that ensured no opening went to waste. She called out to him as he leapt back, putting some distance between himself and the Emperor. I think I've figured something out. Let's hear it. 3 waited for her to continue, keeping up his guard and watching closely for any sign of attack from the Emperor. Have you noticed anything different from when you and Ace fought him before? Was he carrying anything in his left hand back then? 3 glanced at his foe's left hand, seeing it empty. He thought back to 3 years ago. Now that you mention it, I'm pretty sure he had an orb with him. Purple, with a golden sculpture of a crown on it. The battle back then was completely one-sided. Just as I thought, 3 had also sensed something was different, but had simply chalked it up to the Emperor toying with them, as he didn't consider them to be a true threat to him. Factoring in what 9 had just pointed out, however, cast things in a much different light. Oh, you've realized? The Emperor paused his onslaught, as though in recognition of 9's keen observation. You see the implements he has on him now? I suspect at one point he had 4 different artifacts. Damn, that let him control gravity. 4? Huh? 3 said, taking note of the Emperor's equipment. Right, a helmet with a crown motif that can increase or reduce the overall level of gravity, armor that absorbs force impact imparted by attacks the moment they're received, a scepter that sends out a devastating gravitational wave when it makes contact with the target, and an orb with a crown perched on it that allows the wielder to alter gravity on a target-by-target basis. Jesus. 9 paused her explanation for a moment as she looked defiantly at the Emperor. The reason he had worn that tattered cloak was now clear. If someone were to wield so many artifacts at once as he did, it would be necessary to conceal them. Failure to do so would surely attract unwanted attention from the church. Now that you mention it, this time around he hasn't been moving faster while slowing us down at the same time, 3 said. When we fought him before, we couldn't even touch him. It was true that in their fight against him, 3 and Ace had been struggling under different levels of gravity than the Emperor. There was no doubt he was toying with them in the present, but at the very least, both sides were battling under the same levels of gravity, constantly shifting though they were. As such, the pair's odds of winning were much better this time around. I think he either lost the orb at one point, or it was destroyed, or at least damaged in the rock slide, Nine explained. The pair realized that if this were true, now was their best chance to take down the Emperor once and for all. A talented tool indeed. The Emperor's voice was low, tinged with a hint of perverse delight. The artifacts I wear are collectively known as the Monarch's Regalia. I'm impressed you were able to analyze their capabilities in such a limited amount of time. You, Nine of Swords, are truly outstanding. I don't want your praise, you freak. Ignoring Nine's retort, the Emperor continued on, his exhilaration giving way to a violent savagery. But even the greatest tool is worthless if it will not submit to its rightful place in my hands. His body began levitating, broken chunks of earth underfoot rising upward with him. With all the force he could muster, he swung his scepter into a nearby boulder. And worthless tools must be disposed of. In that instant, the boulder shattered into shards of all shapes and sizes that were sent rocketing towards Nine. Watch out! 3 cried out. The shards flew out like a salvo of bullets from 1,000 different guns, all of them pointed directly at one target. It was a grim sight, not unlike a single soldier standing before the assault of an entire army. Panicked, 3 rushed into the line of fire. I actually can't tell from the picture. It's fine. Panicked, he ran into the line of fire. He brandished his sword and did everything he could to prevent the shards from reaching Nine. He deflected and broke what he could, using his body as a shield for the rest. But there was a considerable distance between him and Nine. He could not easily cover. By the time he had leapt in the way, a great many shards were already too far ahead. 3 was too late. 9 had no realistic chance of avoiding the entirety of the attack. Instead, devoted her efforts to simply avoiding the worst of the pieces of stone flying at her. There were far too many, however, and one managed to slip through her defenses. She suffered a direct hit to the abdomen, and red mist sprayed from her mouth as she crumbled to the earth. Chapter 9. Anger and Analysis. 9. 3 ran over to her, his voice hoarse with agony and grief. Her forehead, hands, legs, her entire body was stained with blood, dripping from 1,000 scratches and cuts. It was a fate far too cruel for such a young girl. No matter how many times 3 called out to her, she didn't respond. He had sworn to protect her. He had promised her, but now 3 felt himself overcome by shame and regret. I'm too weak, he thought to himself. Too weak to help anyone. Too weak to save anyone. As if to seize upon his distress, the Emperor spoke once more. So, one of you made it. Now be wise and stop this here. Deliver the final blow, and be spared, just as you did before. At those words, 3 felt a creaking in his mind. It was harsh, like the sound of metal scraping against metal. Surely, a girl like her would derive a warped satisfaction from being killed by the same one who took her brother. The Emperor's mouth twisted into a perverse smile, the depravity in his eyes clear even through the shadow cast by his helmet. It was then that something snapped inside of 3. Rah, die! He exploded, as if the boundless rage coursing through his veins had at last found an outlet. His legs and arms snapped into operation. A primal rumble burst from his throat. His bones creaked and his blood boiled. Pure fury ignited his entire body, inciting it into action. And before he knew it, he launched himself at the Emperor. He unleashed a whirlwind of attacks, his strikes faster and more powerful than ever before. The Emperor met the charge head-on, altering the gravity as he went. But 3 adapted to each shift, almost as if they almost as fast as they came. His body was running on pure instinct, honing his senses to a razor-sharp edge and giving himself an almost preternatural adaptability. The Emperor, on the other hand, found himself working harder and harder to handle Three's hail of blows. He managed to block the oncoming strikes, but his attacker showed no sign of slowing down. Like a wild dog, the Emperor sneered. A tool with a will of its own is a useless thing, to be sure, but seeing you foaming at the mouth like this is pathetic beyond measure. You truly are fated to die as you lived, a mere thing. Even in the face of Three's enraged onslaught, the Emperor had hardly taken any damage at all. He still held all the cards. Three was little more than an annoyance, like a flea biting a wolf. Three's thoughts bubbled back to the surface. He found himself remembering something Nine had said to him. It was his natural sense of composure that allowed him to recall such a timely memory. Composure he did not possess 3 years ago. He continued to let his anger drive his body, but maintained a calm mind, not allowing his thoughts to slip away into rage. He could have stopped himself at any time, but he found his rage beneficial and wielded it ably, as though it was simply another weapon available to him. Three himself was aware of this, but such an ability to not only control one's emotions, but turn them into power was rare indeed. It was a skill that did not come easily to even the greatest warriors, yet Three had managed to master such a complicated concept at his young age. Armor that absorbs the force imparted by attacks the moment they're received. That was how Nine described the Emperor's armor. Sure enough, just as she described, no matter how many strikes he landed, nothing seemed to get through. It was then that a realization dawned on him. If the armor was immune to external force, then what he needed to do was induce internal force. Anyone else might have given up at this point, but Three could scarcely imagine a more suitable target for his unique skills. He combined his blades into one, squaring off against the Emperor yet again. The defining characteristic of Three's weapon was their ability to internally induce an arts-based explosion to their target. To do so, he needed to strike the same point with each blade separately, and then a third time in their fused form. By this point, he had already landed a number of hits on his armor, and luckily for Three, a decent amount of hits overlapped. All that remains was the final step in the process, making contact with those intersecting points using a fused sword. Three attacked the Emperor with the same rage and power as before. This time, though, he failed to land a single hit. It was just a hair's breadth off for every single time. The first steps in his weapon's process were relatively simple. He simply needed to land a strike with each weapon, creating two perpendicular lines that would paint a target for the orbment. The next part, however, was far more difficult. He needed to use the fused blade to hit the precise point where the two lines intersected. This was a much smaller target area, making the task that much more demanding. Still, Three was confident in his aim and knew he had the dexterity to pull it off. In spite of his skill and confidence, however, he continually found himself failing to land the decisive hit. The Emperor cackled in delight as he watched Three struggle. To him, Three's plight was nothing short of comedy. "I know my tools inside and out," he said, a dark grin spreading across his face. "Your methods of attack, how your weapons work, I understand these things better than even you do." As if proving the Emperor's point, Three's next attack fell short as well. The Emperor launched a counterattack with his staff, swung at a perfect angle. Three had figured out his foe's trick. Right before each of his attacks would land, the Emperor would make a subtle change to gravity. His timing was exquisite, and the trick was executed in such a way that Three had no time to correct the angle of his sword. Further, the gravity wave emitted by the Emperor's scepter did nothing at all when it failed to connect, but if it did, the resulting damage would be enormous. Thus far, Three had been able to evade or turn away each incoming swing, but he knew it was only because the Emperor was allowing it. He had yet to land a single effective attack, and the wear on both his weapon and his body was steadily mounting. The outcome of the battle seemed clear. and by all appearances, there was nothing that could change its course. Thanks to his impeccable defense, the Emperor was nearly unscathed, whereas 3 was barely holding on, looking more and more like he could collapse at any time. In between clashes, a momentary calm settled over the battlefield. As 3 was weighing his options, a voice broke the silence. It was a lazy drawl, one that 3 had heard many times over the past year. Analysis complete. 9 struggled to her feet, looking as though she could fall back down at any moment. How? The Emperor's genuine shock escaped his mouth in a low hiss. 9, you're okay. At once, he understood what had happened. 9 hadn't fallen unconscious. She was simply feigning doing so in order to analyze the Emperor in secret. She had given 3 no indication of her plan whatsoever. After all, had she done so, the Emperor may very well have caught on to her plan. Just fine, she responded. I used my thread to cushion the blow of the boulders by shredding them into smaller pieces. In the end, the rocks barely scratched me. Judging by the amount of blood that covered her, it would have been clear to anyone that this was far from the truth, but the fact that remained, she was both alive and conscious. 3 disengaged from the Emperor and moved closer to 9, making sure to keep his eyes trained on his foe as he did. There's a moment where he's unable to respond to anything, she explained. That's his fatal weakness. That's his power's fatal weakness. What do you mean? His gravitational manipulation doesn't require casting an art, like an art would, but after he uses it, there's a period of time of about a second before he's able to use it again. That's why he wasn't able to immediately prevent the falling rocks from burying him earlier. But the way he's changing gravity is so precise, 3 said, thinking back on their battle. How could he have managed that? He was just reading your movements, S. He knows how you fight like the back of his hand. Wait, what? 3 exclaimed, the surprise in his voice clear. It's true, 9 responded. The way he manipulates gravity is determined before you even start your swings. He knows you well enough to straight up predict everything you'll do. Is that even possible? Asked 3, his mind racing. Sure is, 9 continued. And he's not using an artifact for it either. His mind just works that quickly. He's a total monster through and through. The Emperor let out a low chuckle. A sound analysis, but it'll avail you not. I know your techniques inside and out. The same speed, the same power, the same angles, each and every time. There is no possible way you can undo years of the habits we so painstakingly carved into you. S. 9 looked up at him knowingly. Right, he acknowledged. Let's end this. The duo nodded in agreement and turned to face the Emperor once more. 3 charged at him, renewing his previous assault. He raised his sword overhead, attacking at a high angle. The Emperor dodged it effortlessly, and sent forth a counterattack. Their deadly dance continued as before, but as things were, both sides knew where it would ultimately lead. The Emperor sensed an incoming attack and prepared to manipulate gravity. Just as he predicted, 3 attacked a half step faster, aiming for one of the spots in his armor that was previously marked. As the sword raced towards its target, gravity shifted and the sword's trajectory was altered. Despite this, it somehow continued on its original path regardless, as if the altered gravity had been predicted and compensated for. Impossible, the Emperor muttered under his breath. He hastily jerked his body out of the blade's trajectory, with hardly a second to spare. 3's movements had changed somehow. As the Emperor mulled over the changing situation, 3's next attack came speeding in. The Emperor again predicted the speed and trajectory and manipulated gravity accordingly. However, boom. A muffled explosion rang out and the Emperor felt his armor crack, and the pain coursed through his left arm. Boom. What? Another flash. Boom. His right leg was now damaged as well. The Emperor was at a total loss. Had 3 managed to correctly predict his spatial manipulation? How was he able to alter his strikes to compensate for the gravity? Had the analyzer been analyzed himself? Cursing 3's name, the Emperor's thoughts grew frantic. As he desperately looked around for a clue, he realized what was actually happening. He glimpsed a number of barely visible cords extending from 3's body. Naturally, 9 stood at the other end, controlling them. She wasn't pulling him to and fro like a marionette, but was instead nudging his attack slightly, guiding his direction, timing, and angle to create a perfect strike. The Emperor may have been predicting 3's attacks and making adjustments, but 9 was doing the same thing in turn. It was her guidance that allowed 3 to score direct hit after direct hit. Her superior intellect, of course, a major reason why this was possible. But her relationship with 3 was their true secret weapon. The two knew each other better than anyone in the world, which allowed her to predict his reactions and movements with incredible accuracy. She used her natural understanding of her partner to help him adapt his combat style to fit the situation at hand. In that sense, the secret behind the upper hand they had suddenly gained was as simple as could be. "You little wench," the Emperor let out an enraged growl, laced with bitter hatred. Neither 3 nor 9 had ever seen him like this before. He tried to launch the same rocky onslaught at 9 that he had before, but found himself bereft of munitions. He could not be sure when it happened, but at some point, the duel had led him to a different part of the area, one where he could no longer weaponize the terrain. With furious bloodlust, he lowered the gravity near him and rushed at 9. Finally, she smirked. I've been waiting." A giant boulder appeared in the air above him, likely due to an art 9 had cast. The Emperor was unimpressed, however, at being subjected to the same attack twice. This time around, it even lacked the element of surprise. He easily shattered the incoming boulder with his staff once it entered his area of reduced gravity. But it was this flippant display of arrogance that sealed his fate. As the pieces of the boulder rained down around him, he found himself face to face with a plush toy rabbit, one that had been hidden within the boulder. "No," he exclaimed, knowing full well it was no mere toy. His realization came too late, however. With a massive bang, the rabbit detonated. Light and heat washed over the Emperor, and his legs buckled under the force. Just then, another explosion went off at his back. 3 had landed a solid hit on his chest armor, and the resulting blast had blown it clear off his body. "This is the end," 3 said quietly. The black-hearted Emperor's armor had been destroyed, and 3's blade had found its bloody mark. Ooh. Chapter 10. S and N. The Emperor had fallen to his knees, 3's sword protruding from his chest. He looked up at the sky and gave a dry, bitter laugh. "Found some humor in the end, have you?" asked 3. "To think you two would best me," the Emperor said, his voice weak. "I admit it, I underestimated you. You are, by far, the most masterful tools I have ever had the pleasure of owning." "Enough, we're not your tools any longer," 3 said, gripping his sword, preparing himself to silence the Emperor forever. So he thought to himself, the moment to kill had come yet again, the thing he hated most, the thing he would never grow accustomed to. Things were different this time, given that the man who stole away his humanity in the first place now sat at the end of his sword. But that didn't stop 3's hands from trembling. "S," 9 said gently, moving closer. "We'll do it together, okay?" Her typically light and relaxed expression was now serious and sincere. "Okay," 3 responded. This was it, the moment where the two would put their tragic past to rest. 9 placed her hands on 3's. Steadying his weapon, her warmth abated his trembling ever so slightly. They moved to raise the sword together. In response, the Emperor spoke once more. "Every arch of your path thus far has been stained with blood, just as the rest of your lives will be. Your fates are immutable. Kill or be killed. Control or be controlled. You will end up no different than I. We will ever be one and the same." "You're wrong," said 9. "We're no longer anyone's tools, and we'll never force anyone to be ours." After this, we're done, said 3. You're the last person we're ever going to kill. The two took a deep breath and spoke in unison. Farewell. Off in some far-flung region of Calvard, a horse-drawn carriage plodded along. Aside from trains, the most terrestrial transportation had long since switched to orbital cars. So, such an old-fashioned mode of travel was a rare sight to see. The more rustic method did have its certain undeniable charm, however. A boy drove the carriage, while a young girl of about the same age lazed about within. It makes you wonder how he got that way, the boy said, thinking back to the Emperor's face, the one that had been obscured by both cloak and helmet. His appearance had been a poor fit for his monstrous behavior. If anything, he had been rather handsome. Well, I don't mind rumors and hearsay. I might have an answer or two for you. The girl's response came from within the carriage, delivered in her usual sleepy drawl. I'm listening. Well, girl's story went something like this. In a small country, in some corner of the world, there once lived a vile, oppressive king. His reign was tyrannical, his rule evil, and his people lived in fear. One day, he died, and his son, the crown prince, was enthroned. The prince, this new king, was at his core a kind and gentle soul who strove to govern in a fair and just manner. He was determined to avoid his father's errors, but perhaps because they were too accustomed to fear, no one met this new king's ideas with an open mind. Free assembly and speech had already been brutally suppressed during his father's reign, and the people's rage had already reached a boiling point. Violent voices grew louder and louder, eventually resulting in a revolution. The Revolutionary Army launched an assault on the royal palace and forcibly converted the country into a republic, holding the new king accountable for his father's sins. Suddenly, finding his life at risk, he had no choice but to flee, leaving behind his country and his entire way of life. You're telling me this prince eventually became the overseer? The boy asked, his brow wrinkling in thought as he turned the story over in his head. Who can say, shrugged the girl. I don't know if a kingdom like that even existed in the first place. The girl rolled over to continue dozing as the carriage bumped and bounded along its way along the road. Assuming this is more fact than fiction, then what? The boy asked. He was too kind and lost control of his kingdom, so he developed a powerful desire to control others? It's hard to believe. The boy trailed off. He had no intention of giving the overseer even a shred of sympathy, but strangely enough, he did find himself feeling a little pity for the man. The boy and girl fell silent for a few moments. The only sounds that could be heard were the clopping of the horse's hooves and the creaking of the carriage. The boy broke the silence. What is it? The girl raised her head from her nap. Her voice remained as relaxed as ever, but the boy's tone suddenly grew tense. Is there any chance you could ever forgive me for what I did? For what happened between me and your brother? No. The girl's response was swift and blunt. The boy felt silent. He had no right to scorn her answer. Never, she said, because he was my brother and I loved him. He was the only real family I ever had, so... The girl paused for a moment. Her cheeks flushed red, and then she continued in a much louder voice. So if you want me to forgive you, you can't ever leave me. We need to stick together, through thick and thin, you and me, N and S. The boy smiled, his fear a moment ago having left him. Of course, we'll always be there for each other. I'll have your back, and you'll have mine. The girl could barely contain the emotions swelling in her chest at this point. Unfortunately for her, the boy continued talking. I'll do my best to fill his shoes from now on, and that continues making sure you get the education you need to grow into the best person you can be. This was, in fact, not the answer the girl had been looking for. I'm not talking about education, she exclaimed as she started violently shaking the carriage in frustration. But what could be more important? Hey, calm down. This thing can't take too much abuse. It's rickety enough as it is. If you make it fall apart, we'll have to walk the rest of the way. The girl settled back down. Still not fully satisfied with his response, but resolved to leave things be for a moment. The topic changed again. So, any ideas? For the time being, their plan was to head to Liberl or Lamont, just as the boy had initially planned. But where to from there? They had yet to give it much thought. They knew they would be pursued by any number of people from the organization. Despite this, the two knew that as long as they stuck together, they'd find a way to manage. For the moment, they reveled in the idea of an unknown future, a new path to tread that was all their own. In any case, we'll need to find some kind of work, the boy said. Anything in mind? Well, he mused, a confident smile growing on his face. When we consider our skill set, how about something in theater? Not in your life, the girl swiftly retorted. Think about it, S. You're a terrible actor. Hey, I'm not that bad. And I'm sure a play would be way less pressure than an assassination mission. A tad deflated, the boy sank back into his seat, but then threw out another idea, one somewhat more plausible than the last. I know. How about we become bracers? No way, the girl rejected the idea again, but with a bit less bite than before. I heard they get super busy. No sense escaping one's grave just to work yourself into another. There was also the question hanging in the air over whether the Bracer Guild would even consider taking on people with the duo's unique background. All things considered, however, it wasn't the most outlandish idea. Fine. What's your bright idea then? Me? The girl yawned. All I want to do is lay around in bed every day. Just sleep. You're ridiculous, the boy sighed. His face then lit up suddenly as he remembered something. Oh, right. What is it? Names, he said with a hint of excitement. I just realized we haven't shared our real names with each other. Oh, right. N is short for Nadia. That's my real name. Mine's Swin. Swin? Huh, the girl said, hiding a small smile. So S wasn't too far off then. Pretty crazy coincidence. There was a good reason her nickname for him had been so close to his real name. Her brother had mentioned it in one of his letters. Oh. She had known Swin's name before their paths even crossed. After they had worked together for a bit, she decided she wanted to call him by something that resembled his actual name, rather than his organization moniker. This, however, was something she intended to keep to herself. Well, in the end, you'll always be S to me, and always be N to you, right? Yeah, right. Carriage continued in its slow roll forward, as did their conversation. It was profound at moments, but was otherwise silly, lighthearted, and most of all free. The boy's name was Swin, S. The girl's name was Nadia, N. Together they were travelers discovering their newfound humanity. The end. Well, it was very long, but that was very, very good story. I apologize for making it. I'm already not the best at reading, but certainly gave it my best shot to try not to fumble too hard there. I thoroughly enjoyed learning this story, though. I'm so surprised while playing with Trails of Cold Steel 4, I didn't read all the books. I picked them all up, but I didn't read them. I feel like I did read The Butler and the Lady before, but none of the other chapters. So this was all basically new to me. And I've got to wonder, I have no idea if these guys are going to even take place. They have to be, there's got to be some relevance in Reverie, but it's completely unclear what their relevance is going to be. I would love it if they were actual, like, kind of a focus. Kind of like Kevin was in the third, and then everyone else in the cast was like side characters, almost. Well, not side characters, but no, sort of. Yeah, the focus was on Kevin, and I would love this game to have like more of a focus on new characters, while also getting to see Crossbell and what's up with the Class 7 now that everyone's done. I don't know. I don't know what to expect, but that's the end of this. I hope it was enjoyable. I'm a little. I can't speak anymore, so I'm gonna go rest now, and maybe I'll see you in the next one if you want to watch the Let's Play or not. But either way, I hope you enjoyed, even if you didn't. So, thanks for watching. Let me know if you like it, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.